Chapter 1559. Little Meaty didn't open her eyes. She coldly sneered. If you want to see, then so be it. You're a grown man, and yet you're so secretive. You're just a joke to others. Qin Yu chose not to respond. What are you doing? Changing the topic was a great technique that worked every time. He directly moved past the awkwardness. Look for yourself. Little Meaty's words had a double meaning. Judging from her tone, her attitude was quite nasty. But now, in this situation where the spring sunshine couldn't be hidden, it was hard for one to be angry. He couldn't look. Although, from his heart, Qin Yu didn't reject some beautiful things that were pleasing to the eye. But in this world, not all tofu could be eaten for free. If he wasn't careful, it might hurt his teeth. Cough! I came to ask you how much time you need. We should leave. Little Meaty lightly said. Immediately, she spread out her arms, hugging the air and looking up. With a cry, the golden crow totem broke through the magma and flew out, circling around Little Meaty. Bang! At this time, a scorching hot aura rose throughout the entire valley of Tang. It burned the air, forming fierce distortions. In this distortion, motes of light appeared. They were red and deep blue, respectively releasing an extremely hot and extremely cold aura. There were countless motes of light, like a sea of stars that covered Little Meaty. Deep and cryptic fluctuations of strength constantly spread out. The golden crow cried out faster and faster, revealing a bit of exhaustion. It was clear that condensing these motes of light had consumed a tremendous amount of its strength. Qin Yu's heart sank. He couldn't care less about whether or not tofu could be eaten. He looked at her with rapt attention. At this time, as the red and blue motes of light shined, Little Meaty frowned beneath the sea of stars, as if she were enduring some kind of pain. On the surface of her exposed and fair skin, motes of light slowly appeared, covering every inch of her body. Looking carefully, one would discover that the positions of these motes of light were the same as the motes of light that appeared in the distorted space. Moreover, they were the same red and blue motes of light without any confusion in their positions. It was like the current Little Meaty was a great mirror, replicating everything that happened here. And this process was clearly not an easy task for her. The motes of light on Little Meaty's fair skin grew, increasingly bright. As for the motes of light in the distorted space, they rapidly dimmed. Qin Yu took a deep breath. He stared closely at Meaty. At this time, there were no distracting thoughts in his mind. He could clearly sense that as these two colored dots of light were copied onto his body, her aura was disappearing. Seal. That's right, it was this feeling. What Little Meaty was doing was sealing off her own aura, preventing it from leaking out in the slightest. At this time, Qin Yu was enlightened. The reason Little Meaty had followed him to the Golden Crow tribe should have been for this day. In fact, when she gave away the bead to help the Golden Crow totem to evolve, she already had a plan in mind. But what was her purpose in doing this? It was at this moment that little Ro suddenly opened her eyes. Without making the slightest movement, a green mass appeared in front of her. Exuberant life force emanated from this ball of green, bringing with it a fresh, natural, and pure aura of new life. Green Willow Tribe, Totem Divine Willow. Qin Yu had personally touched that willow branch before, so he naturally recognized this aura. If it weren't for the fact that he knew that it was the Green Willow Tribe that had come looking for him, he would have suspected that all of this had been arranged by Little Meaty. Or was everything really under her control? Little Meaty swallowed down this ball of green. The two colored dots of light that appeared on the surface of her body stabilized and became vivid. Crackle, crackle. Light sounds spread out from the distorted space. The dots of light rapidly shattered and dissipated. At the same time, her aura completely vanished. She was like a shadow. If he closed his eyes, even if she were right in front of him, Qin Yu still wouldn't be able to sense her existence. It was like she had escaped into a crack between the heavens and earth, detached from all living things, unable to be sensed or locked onto. The golden crow totem cried out, revealing a deep weariness. It folded its wings and fell down beside Little Meaty, its crimson eyes dim. Little Meaty lifted a hand and stroked its feathers. The golden crow immediately revealed an excited expression. It gently rubbed against her a few times and then flew back into the magma. It was true. Indeed, what the golden crow totem cared about was Little Meaty. Qin Yu was only a target that was placed in the open. Although he had already realized this, when he saw it with his own eyes, Qin Yu still couldn't help but lift a hand and rub his nose. Little Qin Yu, you must remember that after today, you owe me even more. Little Meaty ruthlessly glared at him. Have you seen enough yet? She lifted a hand and flames condensed on her clothes. Crimson flames covered her delicate body. She took a step forward and Meaty staggered and almost fell into the magma. She glared at Qin Yu. What are you standing around for? Hurry up and bring me away from here. Her face was red and beads of sweat covered her forehead. It seemed as if she couldn't resist the burning aura of the Valley of Tang. Qin Yu was startled. He couldn't bother with being unreasonable any longer. He leapt to her side and pulled her into the distorted space-time. He looked at her, a complex look in his eyes. His lips moved, but he didn't know what to say. At this time, seeing her appearance, Qin Yu had already guessed why she had sealed herself just now. It was no wonder that she said he owed her even more. Little Meaty waved her hand. Don't say it now. Just remember it in your heart. Little Meaty waved her hand. Qin Yu nodded. Let's go. He grabbed onto Little Meaty and stepped forwards. Wherever they went, the monstrous sea of fire parted. The golden crow, tribe elder waiting outside the Valley of Tang, saw the sea of fire parting in the distance. He hurriedly sent a message to the patriarch and welcomed them with a smile. General, madam, the patriarch has some matters to deal with. He told me to wait here. Qin Yu knew that Little Meaty didn't like speaking with outsiders. He directly said, I'll have to trouble you. Please inform Patriarch Ku Tua that the two of us will bid our farewells here. The elder didn't dare to stop them. He hesitated for a moment before bowing and retreating. They didn't stop along the way, but just as they were about to leave the Golden Crow tribe, Ku Tua hurried over and apologized. General, madam, how about we stay a little longer? I have already ordered people to prepare a banquet. Qin Yu glanced at him, his eyes deep and profound. Ku Tua suddenly felt as if his entire being had been seen through. A bit of discomfort appeared on his face. He coughed and forced a smile. There are indeed several people who are on good terms with my tribe. They came to me, and I couldn't refuse them, so I had no choice but to come and try. Grandmaster Bo Ri had already given him a clear response. He didn't need to worry too much about the Golden Crow totem. Thus, he was in the mood to do these things. Of course, the so-called on good terms was probably a bit of it, but if Ku Tua spoke, he must have received some benefits. If the Golden Crow tribe patriarch saw this, then these Goliath tribes would surely be generous. Qin Yu smiled. I ask Patriarch to pass on a message for me. Madam and I have suffered great losses and are unable to do anything more. Tomorrow we will set out to return. Ah, General is leaving. A trace of panic appeared in Ku Tuo's eyes. Qin Yu immediately understood. This Golden Crow tribe patriarch had received far too many things. He actually couldn't arrange for everything at once. Blinking his eyes, Qin Yu said, If Patriarch is willing, then I can tell others that you are my good friend. Ku Tuo's eyes brightened. He laughed. General, what are you saying? You and I are good friends with similar temperaments. He walked over and clasped his hands. Without batting an eyelid, a storage ring fell into Qin Yu's hand. A one-time transaction or a steady stream of profits, which was more worth it? This was a very simple question to decide. Little Meaty frowned. Qin Yu's smile faded. Farewell. Patriarch Ku Tua hurriedly saw him off. As he watched Qin Yu and little Meaty leave, he frowned. As he turned around, his forehead was covered with beads of sweat. This madam was truly strange and unfathomable. No wonder she had the qualifications to become the wife of General Jinwu. Just now, she had rolled her eyes at him. Although she was clearly cute and charming, it had caused his mind to stiffen. He had to use all of his strength not to reveal anything. And what was even more terrifying was that he couldn't sense this madam's aura at all. She was right in front of him, yet she was also far away. The Desolate had broken camp and were about to return, even though the Golden Crow tribe had announced the news ahead of time to appease them, such as that General Jinwu would soon return, and so on. But outside the camp, there were still crowds of people. It was unknown how many barbarians had come, but their eyes were filled with longing and longing. Before this, they had deliberately spread the news. As long as the Desolates' border army camp wasn't blind or deaf, they would surely have received the news. But even after several days passed, there was still no movement. It was like a giant stone had fallen into the water, quietly falling into silence. This left the barbarians depressed. It wasn't that no one had any devious thoughts. For instance, they should have taken down General Jinwu and detained him in the barbarians' territory. However, when he saw the calm expression of Reverend Bo-Ri beside the carriage, he suppressed these thoughts. The attitude of the Holy Land was not something they could defy. General Jinwu, please take care. I hope that you will return to the barbarians soon. My boundless tribe is willing to build a camp ahead of time to welcome you. Humph, your boundless tribe has built a camp ahead of time, but my Black Lake tribe has already finished building the camp of our Desolate brothers. General Jinwu, if you want to choose a place to stay, please consider us for the sake of our sincerity. And us, there was an uproar. The various barbarian tribe powerhouses, many of whom were at the elder level, no longer cared about face. In the tribe's totem lucky chants in front of them, what was face? At this time there was a commotion. The crowd parted, revealing the old patriarch of the Green Willow tribe who had hurried over. He fell to his knees and respectfully bowed. General Jinwu, I have come late. I ask that you don't blame me. Towards his humble attitude, the various barbarian tribe powerhouses were dissatisfied deep in their hearts. But as they thought about it, they could understand the current situation of the Green Willow tribe. Anyone who had suffered in despair for 500 years and was rescued by someone would likely be like this after being reborn. From the carriage, Qin Yu's voice sounded out. Patriarch, there is no need to be so polite. Please rise. The old patriarch stood up. He took a deep breath, and a firm expression appeared on his face. Today, I came here to keep my promise. My Green Willow tribe is willing to give up all of our current territory. We will ask the Holy Land for permission to cross the horizontal mountain and enter the far west. West of the horizontal mountain, some scenes appeared in Qin Yu's mind. Since this was the bloodline inheritance of the barbarian sovereign, he naturally knew all of this. The Green Willow tribe's sincerity was indeed great. To give up the territory east of the horizontal mountain and enter the west of the horizontal mountain, this wasn't a decision that anyone could easily make. Before he could think further, the old patriarch offered up a bracelet-style storage treasure with both hands. General, this is everything my tribe can offer to express our gratitude. Please accept it. Beside him, Little Meaty suddenly said, There isn't much, but the quality is good. I never thought that the starving Green Willow tribe would actually have some wealth. Qin Yu thought for a moment and said, Please invite the patriarch up to speak. The carriage door opened by itself. The old patriarch was startled. He immediately revealed a look of respect and quickly boarded the carriage. Behind him, the carriage door closed by itself. He immediately sensed the space-time distortion power that lingered around him. As he looked at Qin Yu and Little Meaty, there was a bit more awe in his eyes. The space-time laws weren't just the most difficult to grasp for the desolate humans, but they were also the most formidable strength. The barbarians were the same. At this moment, the old patriarch thought back to when he first rescued Willow Deity and the terrifying space-time fluctuations. As he thought back to today, this seemingly unremarkable move was actually extremely casual. It was a profound use of the power of space and time, and everything seemed to fit together. The old patriarch bowed. "Greetings, General, Madam." "Qin, you lifted a hand." "There are too many people here, so I will speak frankly." He knocked on the carriage. "The first matter is that the Green Willow tribe does not need to give up today's territory and move to the west of the horizontal mountain." "General." The old patriarch revealed a worried expression. Qin Yu smiled. "I know that you are doing this because you hope that after I return to the western wilderness, I won't be under too much pressure. But, old patriarch, please rest assured. Since I made my move, I have already made all the necessary preparations. I will not fall into a predicament because of this. The Green Willow tribe has experienced many hardships, and it was with great difficulty that you managed to survive. You can rest and recuperate here. The west of the horizontal mountain is not a place you should go to right now." The old patriarch was startled. He stared at Qin Yu, a look of shock on his face. He clearly didn't think that the desolate General Jinwu would have such an understanding of the west of the horizontal mountain. Qin Yu smiled, ignoring the old patriarch's gaze. "The second matter is that I will accept the item, but before long I will need to rent a piece of land in the Green Willow tribe. I ask the old patriarch to agree." The old patriarch's eyes widened, excitement on his face. He could naturally hear the meaning behind Qin Yu's words. The next time the desolate troops entered the Goliath territory, they would be stationed in the Green Willow tribe. And this was undoubtedly the dream of the Goliath powerhouses outside the carriage, their eyes blazing with desire. As the saying went, the pavilion closest to the water enjoys the moonlight first. As the saying goes, a horse doesn't get fat without grass at night. Just look at the Golden Crow tribe today. Because of the desolate camp, Patriarch Kutua had earned so much that it left one envious. Qin, you waved his hand. "I have my own reasons for choosing the Green Willow tribe." "Old Patriarch, there is no need to worry too much about it." "Thank you, General. The Green Willow tribe will definitely make all the preparations in advance and welcome you." The old patriarch respectfully bowed. Qin Yu nodded. "Good. Then I won't keep you any longer. We will meet again soon." The old patriarch stood up and bid his farewells. As he stepped off the carriage, he was met with many envious and jealous gazes. His lips moved as if he were in a dream. From within the carriage, Qin Yu's voice sounded out. "Grandmaster Hanya and fellow Goliath friends, all good things must come to an end. Please stay here." Hanya smiled and bowed. "Farewell, General Jinwu." The various Goliath powerhouses cupped their hands together and shouted out loud, "General, please wait!" The hatred between the Goliath and Desolate races was as deep as the sea. But with the Holy Land's ascetic cultivators expressing their stance, although they didn't know the truth, they were much less afraid. This was also the key reason why Qin Yu was so welcomed and respected by the various Goliath tribes. The wheels turned and they continued onward. The desolate troops returned with a full load, heading towards the borders of the empire. Chapter 1560. Strong winds howled, bringing with them a damp and salty smell. But what was strange was that as the wind blew, it was actually a dark red color, as if it were evaporating blood that had accumulated in the air for a long time. The boulder broke through the earth, rising 1,000 feet into the air. The earth had been corroded by moisture for many years, and its surface was uneven. The white-robed man stood beneath the boulder, his body curled up as he struggled to look up. But he still couldn't find that figure. "My lord, I've gone through untold hardships to finally find you. Even if you don't see my hard work, please remember the divine seat's good intentions and send me away." The strong winds were silent. The white-robed man bitterly smiled. He had already persisted in this bitter wind for 7 days. If this continued, he feared his soul and blood vitality would really scatter. He certainly wanted to leave, but the divine seats hadn't been fulfilled yet, so how could the white-robed man dare to turn around and leave? Without any other choice, he could only cry out loud, throwing away all face. He hugged the boulder in front of him and curled up his body, bitterly persisting as he howled like a ghost. Humph! An angry snort sounded out from the boulder. It was clear that the white-robed man was annoyed by all the noise. If it weren't for the fact that the white-robed man was the divine seat's envoy, he would have already attacked and cut him into pieces. At this time, the sound of a horn echoed out in the distance. It was unknown just what material it was made from, but when it was blown, it resounded through the world and pierced straight into the mind. It made one feel a pressure, as if a mountain had been lifted up and placed directly on their chest. Rumble, rumble. A heaven-shaking explosion followed. The earth beneath him gently trembled, but for some unknown reason, the boulder that the white-robed man hugged remained as motionless as a mountain, not even trembling at all. The white-robed man stiffened. Horror and fear filled his eyes. He thought that his luck was just too bad. What could he do? At this time, a beam of red and white shot up into the skies from the boulder. In the blink of an eye, it was 100,000 feet long. It howled through the endless skies like a bolt of heaven-shaking thunder as it came crashing down. Dong! Like a burning meteor from the highest heavens, it tore through the endless air and smashed into the earth, dragging a long tail behind it. For a moment, the earth shook and the mountains swayed. The white-robed man subconsciously poked his head out and looked in the direction where the white rainbow had fallen. All he could see was the dark and gloomy sky. A huge gash had been torn open, and bright sunlight spilled from it, causing the place where the white rainbow had fallen to become even clearer and more dazzling. Above the boundless sea, with surging waves, a 30,000-meter-long warship was instantly sliced in half. The cut was as smooth as a mirror, and the two halves of the ship were devoured by the roaring waves. During this entire process, the broken ship was completely silent. There were no sounds of panic, screams, or struggles for survival. The pupils of the white-robed man contracted slightly, and he subconsciously revealed even more awe. It turned out that the moment the white light cut the warship in half, it had also killed everyone on the ship. Suddenly, he let out a blood-curdling scream and hastily shrank his head back and closed his eyes. However, blood still dripped down from the corners of his eyes. He casually wiped his face a few times, smearing blood all over his head and face. He blinked again and again. Although it was unbearably sore and painful, at least his eyes weren't blind. The white-robed man let out a long breath. Then he heard a loud shout in his ears, "Take it and scram!" A finger-length strand of hair fell from a boulder. Although it was clearly a thin strand of hair, each strand was as heavy as a mountain. No matter how strong the winds howled, they weren't able to move at all as they fell towards the boulder. The white-robed man was overjoyed. He didn't care about the pain in his eyes. He opened his eyes wide and caught all the strands of hair with both hands. After finishing this, he still didn't feel relieved. He carefully searched the ground for a long time to make sure he hadn't missed a single strand of hair. Then he let out a long breath. He took out a jade box and carefully placed the strands of hair within. Then he sealed it with a yellow talisman and put it away in his robes. The white-robed man bowed. He didn't dare to delay any longer. He turned and left. His figure was like a bolt of lightning, soon vanishing from sight. The crack between the heavens and earth did exist, but it naturally sealed off yin and yang energy, isolating all living beings and objects. It was a realm that no one could enter. Now, in this darkness, after an unknown amount of time of silence, a cold laugh suddenly resounded. "I want to leave. What can you do?" There was a pause for several breaths of time. Fierce, truly fierce. "Then try me." There was another pause. "Hey, are you serious? Don't forget, The two of us have been old friends for so many years. Is there a need to act like this? Several more breaths of time. All right, I'm really afraid of you. So many years have passed, and you're still as straightforward as ever. Is it so hard to change? Several more breaths of time. Are you done yet? Stop talking nonsense. Even if I wanted to come back, I wouldn't be able to do so in a short period of time. If you didn't say anything before, then even if I wanted to leave, I would have to wait until the seal loosened. In the darkness, a helpless sigh echoed out. I will keep my word. I will definitely keep my word. When the time comes, I will definitely return. Then, everything returned to silence. Perhaps it would be the same as before. It was unknown how many years it would be before there was any movement again. Within the carriage, Chinyu opened his eyes. He looked at little Meaty, who was leaning against a soft couch across from him, her eyes closed and a strange light in his eyes. She was still wearing the red dress that she had casually condensed from flames in Tang Valley, making her seem even more beautiful than a flower. But when she wasn't wearing clothes, Chinyu had seen her countless times, so he certainly wasn't captivated by her beauty. He only felt that little Meaty's boring journey was countless times more carefree than anyone else's. For instance, the soft couch she was sleeping on right now was in truth an ancient tree that had shrunk down many times over. All of its branches wove together to form a small bed. Although it wasn't large, it suited one's wishes. It could maintain little Meaty's most comfortable state at any time. Below that was a short and thick tree trunk. Below that were countless roots that drilled into the carriage. It was unknown how it did this, but the roots easily broke through. After being supported by an array formation, the carriage was even harder than refined iron. The roots perfectly fused into it, without the slightest bit of abnormality. But what was even more astonishing was that as the roots fused into the carriage, the space within the carriage was completely isolated from the outside world, no longer able to be sensed at all. Compared to what Chinyu had done before, which was to distort the laws of space and time to form a small, independent space, this was far more secretive and brilliant. In addition, there was a second tree. Although it had shrunk a great deal, its branches were still covered with wine fruits, causing the fragrance of wine to fill the air. The soft couch tree had taken the first step, and its roots had fused into the carriage. Thus, it could only settle for the next best thing, turning its roots into root people. That flattered little Meaty to the extreme. As the saying went, one could stretch out one's hand and open one's mouth for food. Compared to little Meaty's current level of living, this was nothing more than trash. There was simply no comparison between the two sides. When it came to traveling carriages, the most important thing was that they were sturdy. But they didn't have too many requirements for the space inside. But with 2 extra trees, it was clearly a bit tight. Chinyu took the initiative to give up his position, leaving only a space the size of a prayer mat beneath him. He sat down cross-legged. Of course, there was a reason why he was willing to wrong himself. Freeload to eat and drink. This great undertaking that had been interrupted because of the Golden Crow tribe incident had finally begun once more. Little Meaty chose to tacitly agree to this. It was just that before Chinyu ate and drank, she would always intentionally or unintentionally remind him that he owed more and more debts. At the start, he did feel a bit restless. But as the debts increased, to borrow an old saying, lice don't itch when there are too many, he gradually became numb to it. In any case, he had already accumulated debt after debt. Could it be that this mysterious existence hidden in space-time could kill him and eat his flesh and blood? Chinyu was well aware that although his cultivation was decent, his flesh and blood were far from being able to repay his previous debts. In short, he gradually came to a realization. That was, the more debts he owed, the safer he would be. If this existence hidden in space-time wanted to recoup his losses, then he had to ensure that he was alive. Only a living person had the chance to create value. This was a very simple truth. It was unknown whether or not little Meaty had seen through Chinyu's thoughts, but her eyes became increasingly contemptuous, and she sneered without end. It was only because Qin Yu had tempered his skin recently that he was able to eat and drink with a clear conscience. Suddenly, Qin Yu frowned. His eyes fell on Little Meaty's body. Although he couldn't sense her aura, at this moment Qin Yu could feel something strange. It was as if she had suddenly become very heavy. The trunk of the soft couch that carried her was suddenly bent, causing the carriage itself to emit a series of bang sounds. It was as if it would break apart in the next moment. The roots instantly scattered. The wine tree rushed over, its trunk, branches, and roots all wrapped around the soft couch. The two joined together to help it withstand the sudden weight. The ones pulling the carriage were two strange beasts, gifted to them by the Golden Crow tribe. They were incredibly strong and fast, but now they both cried out in pain and fell to their knees. Firstly, the carriage had suddenly become heavy. It was like a mountain rooted to the earth, unshakable. Secondly, the extremely terrifying aura that had suddenly appeared caused them to feel endless fear. "Stop!" Zhou Dafu shouted out. He rushed in front of the carriage as fast as he could. He looked at the two strange beasts kneeling on the ground and took a deep breath. "General, madam, what is happening?" After several breaths of time, Qin Yu's voice sounded out. "It's fine. The team will set up camp here. You don't need to worry about them." Zhou Dafu relaxed a little, but he still didn't dare to be careless. He quickly ordered them to set up camp around the carriage. During this time, his eyes couldn't help but fall onto the carriage several times. Every time, it made his heart tremble. From the bottom of his heart, there was fear and trepidation. It was as if there was a monster hiding in the carriage. Once it opened its mouth, it could easily swallow all of them into its stomach. Zhou Dafu didn't dare to say more. He hurriedly found Lotus Girl. Now, this beautiful woman who had almost no presence after entering the barbarian territory had her eyes tightly closed. Her face was pale, and her forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. This made Zhou Dafu open his mouth, but he didn't know if he should ask. Lotus Girl said in a trembling voice, "My lord, if I were you, I would pretend that I don't know anything." Taking a deep breath, Zhou Dafu turned and left. He had already made up his mind. Before the carriage gave the order, he would not go near. Lotus Girl returned to the carriage. She subconsciously curled up her body. Her whole body was shrouded in fear. She never thought that there would be such a terrifying aura in this world. It was like an endless abyss that could swallow everything in the world and destroy everything. Regarding the status of the desolate General Jinwu in the barbarian race, only tribes that were strong enough were qualified to know. But this did not mean that the small and medium-sized barbarian tribes were not warned in advance. Therefore, the journey of the Desolate Man team was extremely smooth and there were no accidents. Seeing that they were not far from the border and could leave in a few days, the Desolate Man team suddenly camped and rested. It was very normal to rest and recuperate before leaving the land of the barbarians, and then hurry on with the journey in one go. But when the Desolate Man team camped and did not move for 3 days, things became a little strange. On the 5th day, the surrounding small barbarian tribes could only bite the bullet and send people to ask. It was because they had received a warning from their respective tribes that they were not allowed to be disrespectful to the Desolate Man team. Although the tribe leaders and elders could understand this, they could not let everyone in the tribe know that they were in awe of a desolate man otherwise. There would definitely be chaos. The contact with the Desolate Man team was very smooth. One of them appeared and told them that the general had made a breakthrough in his cultivation and needed to rest for a period of time. There was nothing wrong with it. The leaders of the small barbarian tribes gathered together to discuss. Then, on the 2nd day, they made the decision to move the tribe and look for grassland. This was obviously very hasty and puzzling, but this matter was destined to not be explained. To avoid trouble, they would rather travel far away from this area. Otherwise, who knew what accidents would happen? On the 10th day, on the 15th day, on the 20th day, in the camp, the atmosphere gradually became strange. Everyone subconsciously looked at the carriage. Half a month had passed, and there was no movement at all. But that uneasy feeling became stronger and stronger. Zhou Dafu's expression was calm as he maintained order in the camp. Although he looked relaxed, he was actually very anxious. He had decisively sold out General Yi Sangdo. He was already destined to cling to General Jin's thigh. If something happened to General Jin his fate would definitely be more miserable than imagined. In addition, there was also a sense of fear and uneasiness that came from the bottom of his heart. There was no reason, but Zhou Dafu felt that if something happened to General Jin, he would also suffer. This feeling became clearer and clearer as time passed. On the 30th day, the Desolate Man team had camped here for an entire month. Finally, Qin Yu's voice came out from the silent carriage. "Okay, let's go." His voice was slightly hoarse and weak, revealing a deep sense of exhaustion. The strange beast that was pulling the carriage stood up from the ground. It looked back at the carriage, its eyes filled with doubt. The extremely terrifying aura that they had felt before had disappeared. Who? At this moment, all the Desolate Men let out a breath. It felt like they had been buried underground for a long time and could finally breathe freely. Zhou Dafu's pale face was filled with ecstasy. "Let's go." In this month he had been tormented. After shouting this, his vision darkened and he fell to the ground unconscious. Fortunately, Zhou Dafu quickly woke up and the team was able to set off smoothly. In the surroundings, the various barbarian tribes who were secretly watching the Desolate Man team quickly spread the news that the Desolate Man team had left the camp. The Desolate Man team set off again after a month. Chapter 1561. Within the carriage, the two large trees rapidly shrank, turning into two unique hairpins that fell onto Meaty's head. Now, the emerald green hue that appeared on their surface was much dimmer. It was clear that in order to withstand her weight, they had consumed a great deal of energy. Meaty rubbed her eyes, as if she hadn't regained her composure yet. She glanced at the pale Qin in the opposite corner. "How much time has passed?" Qin said a month. He thought for a moment. What happened? Before this, although Meaty had also fallen asleep, it hadn't been so exaggerated. In addition, her aura had suddenly changed, becoming as deep and terrifying as an abyss. It was clear that something had gone wrong. Meaty yawned. "I spoke a few words. I'm fine now." A few words, and she spoke for an entire month. Qin had to use a great deal of effort not to roll his eyes. Meaty seemed to sense his thoughts. Her lips curved up in a cold sneer. "Are you ignorant? Don't you know the old saying that a day in the heavens is a year on earth?" She waved her hand dismissively. "With your cultivation boundary, of course you don't understand. In the future, there might not be a day when you do. TSK, how pitiful, how pitiful." Qin frowned, not speaking. He believed Meaty's words a little. One of her special characteristics was that she wouldn't lie when mocking others. A day in the heavens was a year on earth. One didn't have to live in the heavens. Speaking to the heavens was the same. Qin shook his head and restrained his thoughts. It seemed that Meaty was fine, so he didn't need to worry about her any further. Disregarding his own safety, just the matter of constructing the world-breaking token would require her help. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. As he felt the weakness in his body, he actually smiled. Meaty had become heavy. With the two trees working together, they were just barely able to withstand it. Zhou Dafu and the others looked from afar and could feel a formidable invisible pressure. Moreover, Qin was close at hand in the carriage. If he bore the brunt of this pressure, the taste would be even more torturous. For this month, he had stayed in the carriage without taking half a step away. One reason was because he was worried that there would be a problem with the one within Meaty's body. But more importantly, in this pressure, Qin had found a turning point to sharpen himself. After eating and drinking for many days, his soul and mortal body had grown by leaps and bounds. But this sort of short period of improvement was like building a house on sand. His foundation was unstable. In this way, the taller and bigger the house was, the bigger it would be. Once it collapsed one day, it would be a great calamity. And in this month, he had withstood the pressure of tempering. It was like he had swung a sledgehammer, tempering his entire body. The process was definitely a little tough, but in exchange, he managed to stabilize his foundation. It could be said that he had profited greatly. And more importantly, in these past days, Qin Yu had faintly touched upon a bottleneck. He was confined within, and even breathing became difficult. When he touched this bottleneck, he suddenly understood that this was his boundary. Once he broke through, he would be able to step into the sovereign realm, and his level of existence would undergo another transformation. Across from him, little Meaty looked at Qin Yu several times. She suddenly said, "If you want to obtain more benefits, then don't be in such a hurry to make a breakthrough. There are many rulers in this world, but they are also divided into different ranks." Qin Yu opened his eyes. What should I do? Simply and directly, without hiding anything at all. When it came to increasing his own strength and moving forward on the great Tao in the future, he certainly couldn't allow himself to be careless or pretentious. Qin Yu naturally understood this. Once little Meaty spoke, she wouldn't beat around the bush. If you want to become a ruler, you should at least wait until that darkness in front of you disappears. Qin Yu frowned. He looked deeply at her, his thoughts racing. Soon he determined what she was referring to. Underground in the mine, the heaven and earth spirit embryo. It seemed that this mysterious and unfathomably formidable existence that hid between the heavens and earth had already realized this. At this moment, Qin Yu suddenly thought back to when he first passed through the heaven and earth spirit embryo. He suddenly felt a sense of fear, as if he were being spied on by an invisible strength. Afterwards, Qin Yu searched again and again, but didn't find anything. Now, it seemed that the source was likely this little Meaty in front of him. The soul-planting spirit embryo was something Qin Yu had done by communicating with the stone pagoda. From little Meaty's words, it seemed that he had encountered some other lucky chance. Looking at little Meaty across from him, Qin Yu hesitated for a moment. In the end, he didn't ask anything. For days later, the western wasteland caravan that had rested for a long time didn't stop at all. They finally passed through the hidden mountain gorge and officially stepped into the territory of the Great Desolate. They had returned. Before, it was said that regarding the smuggling, it was fine if everyone knew about it in secret, but it was impossible to bring it out in the open. Qin Yu was one of the top 3 generals of the border army. Now that he had returned to the western wasteland, it was time to separate from the smuggling caravan. Zhou Dafu respectfully bowed. "General, rest assured that the accounts have been prepared by Lotus Maiden. After the handover is completed and there are no mistakes, I will personally deliver your share." Qin Yu casually nodded. He believed that even if Zhou Dafu was 100 times more courageous, he still wouldn't dare to embezzle his profits. After waiting for several breaths of time, Zhou Dafu didn't speak, nor did he bid his farewells. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He glanced at him and said, "If anyone makes things difficult for you, report my name." "Thank you, General." Zhou Dafu was overjoyed. After obtaining Qin Yu's promise, he respectfully bowed. He took several steps back and left. Moments later, the smuggling caravan that returned to the western wasteland vanished into the boundless wilderness. Qin Yu turned. "Let's go." Little Meaty reached out a hand and he grabbed it. Then he shot into the skies. Mine cave. General Jean, who had announced to the outside that he was in seclusion, had finally returned to the place where he had gone into seclusion. Little Meaty said that she was tired from the journey and wanted to go back to rest. News of her appearance in the mine quickly aroused the attention of all parties. General Jean had returned, but he didn't reveal himself. He still maintained his previous state of seclusion. Several garrison generals from the imperial capital had already received the news. They were so anxious that sweat dripped down their foreheads. But after thinking about it again and again, no one dared to knock on the general's door. Advisor by Sue had already been summoned back to the imperial capital for over a month. They didn't have the qualifications. In any case, His Majesty and those great figures in the imperial capital had already waited for over a month. They didn't mind waiting for a few more days. Deep underground, it was as dark as a curtain. Qin Yu quietly walked forwards. His entire person seemed to blend into the darkness. There was no movement at all, and not even the tiniest bit of his aura leaked out. When he entered the underground this time, he was acting in secret. He didn't want anyone to know. Along the way, he encountered many underground sinners, but even when they brushed past each other, they didn't notice him at all. Finally, he arrived at the Ghost Fog Grotto. Qin Yu looked up. Then his figure flashed, and he entered. Within the grotto, the space and time laws wove together. To him, they were naturally useless. After several steps, the world spirit embryo that was shaped like a water droplet appeared in front of Qin Yu. Although there was a close connection between him and the world spirit embryo after he planted the soul, there was still a great difference. But personally coming here and indirectly sensing it were still very different. After carefully looking at it, Qin Yu's lips curved up in a smile. Everything went smoothly. The soul seed had already taken root and sprouted, smoothly fusing with the world spirit embryo. At this time he felt as if it could open its eyes at any moment. Little Meaty had reminded him that in order to break through to the ruler realm, he would have to wait until the spirit embryo opened its eyes. It seemed that day wouldn't be too far away. After carefully inspecting the state of the world spirit embryo and determining that there was nothing wrong with it, Qin Yu turned and left. Just like before, after suppressing and subduing the sinners beneath the mine, he didn't do anything at all. Maintaining everything as it was the best disguise. This was to prevent others from discovering the secrets hidden beneath the mine. The guards of the mine anxiously waited. Imperial General Ning Qin had finally left seclusion. Not daring to delay any longer, several guards hurried over to greet him. "Greetings, General." Several people knelt to the ground and respectfully bowed. Qin Yu nodded. "Rise. Has everything been well while I was in seclusion?" "Reporting to General, everything in the mine has been stable. There has been no chaos." The guard called Wang. Datu bitterly smiled and said, "But there is an imperial decree in the imperial capital that has already been sent to the mine. The angel has been waiting for it for a long time." His words contained a hint of warning. Qin Yu's eyes flashed and a thoughtful look crossed his face. "I understand." Along the way, because Little Meaty had suddenly grown heavier, he had been delayed for a month. Thinking about it, there were many people who were anxiously waiting to see him suffer misfortune, and they found it hard to bear. Li Datu often cursed at his nephew, but he naturally didn't dare to do so to the general. The bitter smile on his face became even thicker. "General, the angel represents His Majesty. It would have been fine if you hadn't left seclusion. In this world, cultivation is the greatest and no one can find fault with you. But since you have already left seclusion, we should invite the angel to announce the decree as soon as possible, lest we delay your matters." The other generals nodded. Qin Yu glanced at them. They all had worried looks on their faces. He smiled. I will immediately invite the angel." Just as he finished speaking, there was a loud clamor outside. Soon the door was pushed open. Several border guards had helpless and panicked expressions. They hurriedly knelt to the ground and bowed. "General, the angel heard that you left seclusion and insisted on coming to see you. Subordinates were unable to stop him. So I ask that you punish him." From the crowd of several people, a white-faced young eunuch walked in. He glanced over and said in a sharp voice, "I came to the mine and waited for over a month. When I heard that General Jinwu had left seclusion, I hurried over to pay my respects. After all, I carry His Majesty's decree on my body. I don't dare to delay any longer. Otherwise I fear I will commit a crime punishable by death." It was clear that there was a hidden meaning in his words. Although he seemed to be speaking to himself, the truth was that he was reflecting Qin Yu. Qin Yu had only entered the imperial palace a limited number of times. This young eunuch in front of him was someone he had never seen before. But he didn't think that this eunuch was an important figure in the imperial palace. Otherwise he wouldn't have dared to act so arrogantly in front of him. The Western Wasteland Great Emperor had sent this blind character to the border army to pass on a decree. Just what sort of message was he trying to pass on? Qin Yu's thoughts raced. He lightly said, "Military affairs are my top priority. I believe that His Majesty won't blame me if he learns of this." Although he was sitting, he looked at the eunuch with a condescending gaze. "Eunuch, since you wish to announce the decree, then let's begin." The young eunuch's face flushed red. How could he not feel the contempt in Qin Yu's eyes? He clenched his teeth and took out a bright yellow imperial decree. He opened it with both hands and said, "His Majesty's decree, General Jinwu Ning Qin, please hear it." Qin Yu stood up. He cupped his hands together and shouted, "I am here." Like a thunderclap, it exploded in the room. In the army, a general didn't kneel in front of a decree. This was the courtesy that the Western Wastelands imperial family had always given to the military. With Qin Yu's current status as the number 3 general of the Western Border Army, it wasn't too much to call him a general. Moreover, the current mine was Qin Yu's base territory. The 100,000 border army soldiers were all under his control. The young eunuch's complexion changed. His mind that had been clouded by anger suddenly calmed down, and he felt a chill crawl up his back. The empire's military had always been domineering. Even some important figures in the palace might not be placed in their eyes. In his years in the palace, he had seen many similar situations. Moreover, he was just a mere eunuch that had recently been favored. Although it seemed like he was doing well, that was only on the surface. Thinking of this, and thinking of the favored empress behind him, the young eunuch bit down on his lips, the taste of blood filling his mouth. His eyes were dark and filled with hatred. He swept his eyes over the 2 people beside him and finally regained his composure. He feared that he had been used as a spear by someone else. For better or worse, he was someone who had mingled in the deep sea that was the imperial palace. For him to have his current status, he naturally had his own outstanding points. Steadying his mind, the young eunuch read out the imperial decree. There was a great deal of content, and the wording was complicated. In summary, Qin Yu was summoned back to the imperial capital to report on his duties. "I accept the decree." Qin Yu received the bright yellow imperial decree with both hands, his expression calm. This was something he had already expected, so he didn't panic at all. The young eunuch squeezed out a smile. "General Jinwu, there is no need to be so courteous. I know that your seclusion is tiring, but His Majesty has already urged you many times. If it weren't for this, I wouldn't have been so anxious before and offended General Jinwu. I ask that the general forgive me." Qin Yu lightly said, "Eunuch's words are too serious. Once I go to the camp and explain things to General Wu, I will immediately leave." The young eunuch nodded again and again, indicating that it was fine. Qin Yu reached out a hand. "I won't see you off." The young eunuch's smiling face stiffened. He led his people away. Compared to the aggressive attitude he had when he first arrived, there was clearly a bit more fear in him. As they left the courtyard, the young eunuch walked at the front. He suddenly stopped and turned around, his eyes filled with hatred. He clenched his teeth and roared, "You 2 really have good methods. You've quietly lured me in." He thought back to General Jinwu's expression when he received the decree, and then thought back to the current strange situation in the imperial capital. The young eunuch panicked. As he looked at the 2, his eyes became even colder. "Eunuch, what are you saying? The 2 of us are only deputy envoys. We followed you here to read out the decree and summon General Jinwu to the imperial capital. That's right. I don't know what you mean by that either. The two of them echoed each other, shouting that they were wronged. But their expressions were calm and composed, without the least bit of concealment. The young eunuch's complexion changed several times. He took a deep breath and put on a fake smile. That's right. I was confused and said something I shouldn't have. I hope you two don't mind. He turned and walked away, his complexion soon composing itself. With such shrewdness, he could be considered a top character. The two people behind him frowned. They glanced at each other and then calmed down. This little brat, he was a quick learner and a quick learner. If he was given some time, he would surely have a bright future ahead of him. But there were some people who were doomed from the start and had no future at all. General Jinwoo arrived at the border army camp and paid his respects to General Wu. Everything went smoothly. Wu Tongtian personally stamped Yi Sang's military memorial and chatted with him with a smile on his face, without any awkwardness. After talking about the local customs and customs of the barbarian tribes, Qin Yi stood up and bid his farewells. Wu Tongtian smiled. I am the commander of the border army. Since there are some matters that have been placed in front of me, I have no choice but to intervene. But thinking about it, General Jinwoo won't encounter any trouble when he goes to the imperial capital, and there might even be some other lucky chances. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. I thank General Wu for your auspicious words. He left. The caravan of angels was already waiting outside the border army camp. Qin Yu boarded the carriage. Without any pause, he set off. Little Meat looked out the window, a bored expression on her face. When Qin Yu came in, she glared at him. Hurry, hurry, I'm almost always on the road. My good vacation has nearly been ruined by you. Qin Yu thought that he wasn't the one who wanted her to come, but no matter what, he couldn't say these words. With Little Meat by his side, his safety was guaranteed perfect. Even if she wanted to stay, Qin Yu had to think of a way to keep her by his side. Cough! The border army camp is barren and desolate. Once we reach the Western Wasteland's imperial capital, it will be one of the most prosperous places in the world. You won't be disappointed. Little Meat thought for a moment and then humphed. Deep in her eyes, there was a bit of anticipation. With a smile, Qin Yu turned and sat down. His fingers gently tapped his knees as he thought about what Wu Tongtian had just said. With his status, he wouldn't speak without thinking. Since he said this, it was likely that he had obtained some secret information ahead of time. Returning to the imperial capital this time shouldn't be too dangerous. But there were always accidents in everything. He couldn't be lacking in caution. In addition, if he had a chance, he should try to do some homework ahead of time and see whether or not he could achieve what he had planned. If he could, then humph! He feared that the Western Wasteland would dig a deep pit for itself. Chapter 1562. In order to prevent accidents, the border army strictly forbade large-scale transmission arrays to connect to the most important regions of the empire. The Angels' caravan continued without stopping. 2 days later, they finally left the wartime control zone and arrived at a border city. After revealing their identities, they were unimpeded. After the city lord received the news, he hurriedly rushed over. But he only had time to see the back of the caravan enter the transmission array. He couldn't help but sigh in disappointment. A small city connected to a large city, and a large city connected to a main city. And only within the borders of the Western Wasteland, there were 108 main cities that had the qualifications to directly reach the imperial capital. After passing through many places, Qin Yu coincidentally arrived at Sigay City. His current status was the third son of the Western Border Army, and he was given the title of first-class Loyal Marshal Earl, comparable to a great general. Now that he had received the Emperor's decree and was returning to the imperial capital to report on his duties, he had to follow the rules and etiquette. Thus, after arriving at Sigay City, the Western Wasteland Border Army soldiers that came out of the mines and clearly relied on the general to rush to the relay station for temporary repairs. The border army soldiers that had been trapped in the mines and ended up in a state that was neither human nor ghost didn't think that they would have the chance to follow the general to Sigay City and experience the world's most prosperous city. The general, called Wang, Datus stuck out his chest and held his head high. Together with his subordinates, he brought out 120% of his energy and spirit. Although we are only some bumpkins of the border army, it wasn't easy for us to restore our human bodies. We can't lose the general's face. Feeling the awe and reverence in the eyes of the people on both sides of the street, Wang Datus straightened his back even more. He pulled down his helmet and his eyes reddened. He felt even more heartfelt gratitude towards his general. And at this time, the angel had already sent a message to the imperial capital. All that was left was to wait for a response. Only after receiving permission would they complete the last part of the journey. General, this journey has been extremely tiring. You have repeatedly passed through the Empire's territory. Please rest well for a day. If there isn't an accident, we will be allowed to enter the imperial capital tomorrow. The young eunuch smiled, his tone friendly and respectful. Although it was too late to mend the pen after the sheep were lost, it was better to mend the situation as much as possible. It was better than doing nothing at all. Qin Yu nodded, not saying anything more to him. He brought little Meaty into the relay station, which had already been tidied up. It was the most luxurious courtyard. Although the young eunuch was just a person with some achievements in the palace, he now had the identity of reading the emperor's decree. Before he returned to the capital, he was still an angel that represented the emperor's prestige. Naturally, he had his own courtyard in the relay station. After closing the door and dismissing his servants, he quickly took out a jade slip from his chest. After several breaths of time, the jade slip silently disintegrated into powder. The young eunuch's complexion paled and his lips trembled, revealing a look of fear. He poured himself a cup of tea. His hands were shaking so much that his sleeves were wet, but he couldn't drink even half a mouthful. Suddenly, the young eunuch showed a ferocious expression and threw the teacup on the ground, smashing it into pieces. But after a loud crack, the young eunuch looked at the shattered teacup on the ground in a daze. It was as if all the strength in his body had been sucked out, and he burst into tears. And in an unknown courtyard, as the young eunuch was sobbing in fear, Qin Yu welcomed a visitor. Guanhai City, Lord Qin Yuanshin. General Jin, I came here today to apologize for what happened in the past. He got straight to the point. Qin Yuanshin, who controlled a large city and was a shrewd man, didn't try to hide his position. His first words clearly pointed out today's topic. That insufferably arrogant young master of the city, Lord Mansion, looked at the armored general sitting on the same level as his father. A trace of resentment and unwillingness flashed in his eyes, but he knew that he had to lower his head today. When news of the turmoil in the capital spread out, he had been extremely excited. But after that, things developed in a strange manner. In addition, Qin Shanglov knew that his father's attitude had changed. Although the imperial capital seemed turbulent, it couldn't shake General Jin. Since he couldn't move him, then the storm he stirred up might become a boost to General Jin, allowing him to take another step further. Otherwise, with his father's status, how could he have suffered such a setback today? Qin Shanglov took a deep breath and stepped forwards. He bowed. I didn't know the true face of MT Liu and unintentionally offended General. I asked General to be magnanimous and not bother with me. His words were sincere and filled with remorse. If it weren't for the fact that Qin Yu's perception of the human heart had reached an extremely keen level, he might have been able to sense some of the emotions that flashed in his eyes. Qin Yu picked up a teacup and took a sip. City Lord is too serious. Since what happened in the past has already been resolved, I will naturally forget about it. Qin Yuanshan laughed. General's magnanimity is for my sake, but since I have offended a supreme, I will naturally be punished. He flicked his sleeves. With a loud cracking sound, Qin Shangolv cried out miserably and fell to his knees. Blood soaked his robes and seeped into the ground. He knelt in a pool of his own blood, his face pale from the pain and his forehead covered with beads of sweat. He was truly distressed to the extreme. There was no longer any trace of his past carefree and insufferably arrogant appearance. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. He thought that these powerful old foxes were truly ruthless. To personally break Qin Shangolv's legs so that he could quell the anger in his heart, that was more than enough sincerity. But to his own son, he could be ruthless to this extent. To outsiders, it was even more imaginable. For such a person, unless one had the confidence to completely knock him down and trample him into the mud, never to rise again, or directly kill him on the spot, it was best not to be an enemy. In fact, this was the signal that Qin Yuanqin wanted to pass to Qin Yu. I am very sincere to resolve the grievances between us. Either we shake hands and make peace, or we will rely on our own means. Qin Yu frowned slightly. He picked up the teacup and took another sip. He said lightly, "City Lord, what do you mean?" He understood, but it didn't mean that he would accept it, especially in this almost semi-threatening way. Qin Yuanqin said, "I want to express my sincerity to be close to the general. If it is not enough, Su Xin, you ask the general for punishment." After entering the room, the deputy general, who had been standing in the corner like an invisible person, bowed in acknowledgement and strode forward. His face was pale, but he didn't hesitate. He grabbed one of his arms and tore it off. Suddenly, blood splashed out. The air was thick with the smell of blood. Without stopping his own bleeding, Su Xin knelt on one knee and raised his broken arm. "General Jin Wu, I wonder if this arm is enough to pay for the mistake I made in the past." Qin Yu coldly sneered. He set down his teacup and said, "How interesting, how truly interesting. I was only passing by. So why must Sir City Lord make the scene so bloody? It seems as if I am the one who bullies everyone in Sea-Watch City. If this spread out, what would happen to my reputation? The City Lord said that you want to be close to me, but this is forcing me to tear apart all pretense of cordiality with you. Please, in the future, if the City Lord is dissatisfied in the court, you can make a move." They parted on bad terms. Qin Yuanqin walked out of the courier station. His son had a broken leg and the deputy general was missing an arm. He looked back and there was no gloominess on his face, only helplessness. "Your Majesty, since there is no evidence, can't you just let it go?" The minor officials in the courier station looked at the scene in front of them. They were so scared that their faces turned ashen and their bodies shook like a sieve. They didn't dare to approach. "Let's go." Qin Yuanqin sighed. He boarded his carriage and left. At night, rumors began to spread through Sea-Watch City that General Jinwu Ningqin hadn't forgotten his old grudges and was using his power to suppress the city Lord Mansion. Although no one knew the specific details, Qin Shanglu had a broken leg and Su Xin had lost an arm. These were indisputable facts. For a time, everyone glanced over. Some people frowned. They thought that General Jinwu Ningqin was too rampant after gaining power and couldn't be approached. Some people thought that General Jinwu was revealing his sharpness and that there would surely be a great calamity in the future. But at the same time, they also felt that if General Jinwu dared to act so arrogantly and domineeringly at this time, then he really did have a plan. In other words, he really didn't care about the storm in the imperial capital. Courier station. Someone came to Qin Yu's room, but this time it wasn't a guest. He looked at the hesitant True Saint across from him. He said, "Why are you so hesitant? Did you betray me?" True Saint Baiyu bitterly smiled. He bowed. "I don't dare to deceive General. After I returned to the imperial capital, I was asked 3 times whether or not there was anything wrong with your actions." He clenched his teeth and continued to say, "This subordinate has truthfully reported everything without concealing anything." He thought back to how his uncle had personally asked General Jinwu Ningqin if there was anything strange about him. After hesitating again and again, he finally nodded. There was indeed something strange. For instance, that unfathomably deep young girl from the demonic sect. For instance, the curse in the mind that not even a half-sovereign could resolve. And finally, there was General Jinwu Ningqin's hidden strength. Facing his uncle, he couldn't and didn't dare to hide anything. Thus, at this time, true Saint Baiyu's complexion paled. His heart was filled with endless guilt. He lowered his head, not daring to look the person in front of him. He thought for a moment and said, "From the start, I already knew your role. Since I didn't hide anything from you, I'm not afraid of you telling me the truth." True sage, Baiyu fiercely looked up at Qinyu, surprise in his eyes. "What are you looking at? Since I said it, there is naturally no problem." True Saint Baiyu let out a long breath. Even now, he still didn't think he had clearly seen his general's true appearance. But at the very least, he could confirm one thing. He wasn't someone who was trying to impress others with his face. If he said it was fine, then it was definitely fine. That's good, that's good. True Saint Baiyu whispered, a happy look on his face. Qinyu coldly sneered. "Of course. This is also the reason why you told me the truth. Otherwise, I might not have let you off the hook. Your current status is that of a counselor to me. The crime of falsely accusing a superior behind her back is enough for you to be sentenced to death by the army." True Saint Baiyu knew that these words contained both truth and falsehood. He respectfully bowed. This subordinate absolutely wouldn't dare to hide anything from General. Qinyu humphed. He didn't want to waste words with him. "Tell me, what is the situation in the imperial capital right now?" Although he had already guessed that there wouldn't be any risks on this trip, it was better to be a bit more cautious. True Saint Baiyu seemed to be prepared for this. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. He explained the situation in the imperial capital to Qinyu in detail. It was extremely detailed, covering nearly every aspect. Qinyu had a strange expression. "This isn't information that you could have heard, right?" True Saint Baiyu coughed. "General is wise." He didn't explain. In truth, there was no need to explain. The source of this information was definitely the Skyrise King. His heart settled. Although this matter wasn't too remarkable, it confirmed Qinyu's previous speculations. This return to the imperial capital would be a daunting experience without any mishaps. True Saint Baiyu thought for a moment. "General, Siwatch City's city lord is one of His Majesty's closest confidants. Although he has been caught up in some disturbances in recent years, he is still favored by His Majesty. He also has many old friends in court, so these minor matters." Before he could finish, he was interrupted by Qinyu's faint smile. He braced himself and said, "General, did I say something wrong?" Qinyu waved his hand, not explaining. He only shook his head. How could things be so simple? For Siwatch City's city lord to have his current status, how could he act so crudely? In short, today should be a test that His Majesty had given Qin Yuanshan. Of course, the main goal of this test was him. If Qinyu didn't accept it and didn't cooperate, it would seem rude and unreasonable. But for both sides, this was the best choice. Chapter 1563. If the Western Wasteland Great Emperor wanted to see Qinyu's confidence, then he would show it to him. The next morning, the imperial capital sent a reply to the relay station, allowing Imperial Jinwu Ningqin to return. They gathered their troops and showed what they were relying on. The caravan of angels drove towards Siwatch City's transmission array. The young eunuch didn't show himself, saying that he had caught a cold last night. After he boarded the carriage, he didn't come out again. His attitude was completely different from yesterday, but Qinyu didn't care. His current opponents were the aristocrats of the Western Wasteland dynasty, as well as the great emperor above the 9th layer. A mere eunuch, even if he had some status and power in the imperial palace, wouldn't be placed in his eyes. This was the confidence that a general of the imperial army should have. A moment later, with a humming sound, the transmission array exploded with a dazzling light. Space twisted, and they vanished from sight. When the feeling of space shaking around them disappeared and the carriage landed on the ground once more, they had already arrived in the capital region. The guards stationed in the imperial capital all bowed. One reason was to show respect to the angels, and the second reason was to show awe to the great general of the border army. Although the imperial capital's garrison was made up of the elites of the army, it was rare for chaos to occur in the imperial capital for thousands of years. It was like a sheathed blade that had no place to use it. As for the border army that had been stationed in these past years, they had fought all sorts of battles all year round, and those that survived were all brave warriors. The Mine general, called Wang Datu, could feel the gazes of his comrades in the imperial capital. He shouted out loud and led the little children under his command, bringing out 120% of their aura. Their steps were like that of a dragon or tiger, their aura swallowing the mountains and rivers, as if they could sweep away everything in their path. The complexions of the garrison soldiers changed. As they thought about the strange atmosphere in the imperial capital, they thought that Imperial Jinwu Ningqin might have come here for revenge. Cough! Within the carriage, there was a light cough from Qin Yu. Wang Datu had already sensed the change in the eyes of his comrades in the imperial capital. He thought that when it came to showing off, he really had to pay attention to his limits. Otherwise, if he used too much strength, it was likely that extreme joy would turn to sorrow. He vaguely made a hand gesture, telling these little rascals to restrain themselves a bit. Unexpectedly, his nephew Wang Sen was so pleased with himself that he puffed out his chest, sucked in his stomach, and raised his head. He stomped his feet loudly, and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He did not receive his signal at all. This made Wang Datu very angry, but he could not kick him in front of everyone and scold him for being a blind bastard. Qin Yu's lips twitched. He had no idea how the Wang family uncle and nephew had managed to fight for the chance to return to the imperial capital with him. His performance was really like that of a clown. Fortunately, although the soldiers of the Imperial Garrison Division were vigilant, they did not do anything out of line. They watched as the carriage headed for the imperial capital. After that, everything went smoothly. An assistant minister of the imperial court and a deputy general of the military personally came to greet them. The standard was not high, but it met the requirements of etiquette. The young eunuch finally got off the carriage. His face was pale and he looked listless, as if he was seriously ill. After saluting, he led the imperial decree team back to the imperial palace. Qin Yu glanced at the eunuch's back and frowned. Then he composed himself and stepped down from the carriage to greet the assistant minister and deputy general. Although the atmosphere in the imperial capital was strange, General Jin was still the target of everyone in the imperial court. Before the situation became clear, it was best not to get involved. The assistant minister and deputy general who had been pushed to take on this errand were already cursing inwardly, so they didn't pay much attention to their greetings. Luckily, they were gratified to find that General Jin Qin knew his own limits and quickly stopped this meaningless conversation. The assistant minister and deputy general couldn't avoid him in time. They hurriedly returned to their residences to report on their tasks. True Saint Bai Su became the guide. His Majesty has ordered that a general's residence be built in the imperial capital for the general. It was just completed not long ago. The Western Wasteland's imperial capital was naturally a peak city in this world. It was luxurious and prosperous, and it also represented supreme dignity and power. After entering the city, there were countless dignitaries coming and going. After putting away what they could rely on, although they saw a group of fierce and ferocious border army troops that attracted some attention, most of them just glanced over and didn't linger for too long. This caused Wang Datu and the other border army bumpkins to secretly think that this was indeed the imperial capital. They subconsciously restrained their arrogance and cowered away, becoming even more inconspicuous. They arrived at the general's residence. In the eastern city of the imperial capital, there was a place where people gathered. Although this residence wasn't too large, looking at the signboards of the residences on the left and right, One could tell that this residence wasn't wronged at all. In fact, Qin Yu's status as a General Jin could be considered a favor. However, what was strange was that this newly renovated and completed general's residence didn't have a signboard hanging on it. It seemed as if it were an ownerless land. Bai Su said the residence has already been built. There was news from the imperial palace that His Majesty would personally write an inscription. But afterwards a great wave of impeachment erupted and this matter was left unsettled. Until now, there has been no further news. He hesitated for a moment and then continued to say, and this is also one of the reasons that many people in the imperial capital look down on you. They feel that you have lost the favor of the emperor. Qin Yu looked up at the residence that didn't have a signboard. He faintly smiled and said, perhaps His Majesty hasn't decided what to inscribe on it yet. Bai Su's eyes brightened. He smiled and bowed. What General says is correct. The doors opened wide. The servants that had already been arranged all walked out from both sides of the residence. They knelt to the ground and respectfully kowtowed. Among them there were countless beautiful maids, each one as beautiful as a flower. Their small eyes constantly darted around, as if they wanted to drill out little hooks and hook the general's soul away. Qin, you could clearly hear little Meaty, who hadn't shown herself in the carriage, coldly curse at them. What a bunch of shameless little hussies! Thus, in the next moment, outside the residence, the maids that had been sending flirtatious glances paled and couldn't help but shiver. Qin Yu's eyes lit up with amusement. He waved his hand to dismiss them and entered the general's residence. The so-called carved railings and painted pillars, the so-called unparalleled extravagance, in short, this residence was built extremely well. Thinking about it, it must have cost a great deal of money. But Qin Yu only glanced at all of this, not placing it in his heart at all. To him, this general's residence in the imperial capital was nothing more than a temporary place to stay. He wouldn't use it properly. If there came a day when Qin Yu really did live here, then this residence would inevitably become an iron cage that would lock him in here. That would be truly tragic. He arranged for the border soldiers to rest in a few side courtyards and warned them not to embarrass themselves. When they were at the door just now, their eyes were like wolves and tigers, as if they wanted to swallow the little girls who were kneeling on the ground and sending them off alive. Although Qin Yu didn't care, in the western desolate imperial capital, who knew what sort of trash these maids that were sent in ahead of time were? It was best if he didn't touch them, lest these men who hadn't tasted meat for many years suddenly become spies for others. Little Meaty coldly sneered. Lord General, take it easy. If there are too many women, they can also eat people up. She turned and went to the rear residence. She didn't forget to bring along several maids that she had personally chosen to serve at her side. Their common characteristic was that they were extremely beautiful. Amongst the maids, they were the cream of the crop. Of course, outside of the residence, they were also the ones who flirted with Qin Yu the most. Qin Yu was happy to have some peace and quiet. He believed that little Meaty wouldn't casually do anything to them. As for whether or not these maids would stir up trouble, if they didn't want to bring trouble upon themselves, they had best behave themselves. He didn't worry about little Meaty at all. The sun rose high in the sky and began to move to the west. Dusk was approaching. Qin Yu's eyebrows rose up, surprise on his face. But just as he thought that the imperial palace wouldn't summon him today, and lanterns were lit throughout the residence, an imperial edict arrived. An old eunuch bowed. General Jin, His Majesty is very busy today. He has just finished handling some trivial matters and has ordered me to invite you over. He was thin, old, and trembling as if he could be blown away by a gust of wind. But at this time, Qin Yu could feel a faintly discernible suppression coming from this old eunuch. This was also because his senses had become sharper after he planted a soul seed. Otherwise, he feared that even if this person stood in front of him, he still wouldn't be able to sense him. The Western Wasteland Imperial Palace was truly a place of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Even an old eunuch, that he had never seen before had such an astonishing cultivation. "Qin Yu didn't delay at all. He directly said, 'It wouldn't be good to keep His Majesty waiting for too long. Let's go.'" The journey was smooth. Before arriving at the imperial palace, although he had already been here more than once, he could still feel the invisible suppression in the air. It made one instinctively feel endless awe. "Greetings, General Jean." The imperial palace guard knelt on the ground and bowed. Qin Yu nodded. "Rise." The old eunuch didn't stop. He stepped through the gates of the imperial palace. Qin Yu calmly followed behind. They passed through a large palace, passed through a long corridor, and crossed a massive square. Finally, Qin Yu arrived at the palace where the great emperor handled government affairs. The inscribed plaque read, "Longevity Hall." The 3 words were golden. In the darkness, they emitted a dazzling radiance, mysterious and mystical. The old eunuch turned and said, "General Jean, please wait a moment. I will go in and report." Before he finished speaking, a light chuckle echoed in his ears. "That's enough, you old fool. You know I'm starving, so why bother? Ning Qin just come in. I've been waiting for you for a while." The old eunuch didn't panic, nor did he flatter. As he heard the Western Wasteland great emperor's mocking words, he only bowed and retreated to a corner of the hall. Only then did Qin Yu realize that on the other side of the palace door, there was also an old eunuch standing there. He was even older than the previous one. The feeling this old eunuch gave off was that of a wooden stake covered in cracks. He stood at the entrance with his eyes closed, without the least bit of sound. When Qin Yu first arrived, he didn't even discover that there was another person here. As if sensing General Jin's gaze, the old eunuch opened his eyes. A sharp light flashed in them, like a bolt of lightning cutting through the dark skies, particularly dazzling in the night. Qin Yu had a calm expression. He cupped his hands together and said, "I'll have to trouble you too." He pushed open the door and entered the hall. He first walked through the front courtyard and turned around a screen. Only then did he see His Majesty. He was sitting cross-legged on a golden cushion, delicacies spread out in front of him. This was Qin Yu's first time clearly seeing the appearance of this Western Wasteland great emperor. He had a white face and a beard. His figure was a bit chubby, and he had a smile on his face. But his aura of ruling the world still left one's heart racing. "This subject, Golden General Ning Qin, greets your Majesty." Before he could bow, he was interrupted by a wave of the great emperor's hand. I'm hungry. Let's eat first. You're lucky today, so there's no need to be polite." Qin Yu said yes. "Thank you, your Majesty." Across from the throne was a table. The dishes on the table were the same as those on the other side. To sit in front of the great emperor and eat the same food was a great courtesy. The great emperor lifted his chopsticks and began to eat. Once the food turns cold, the taste will deteriorate. I still have some matters to discuss, so I won't be drinking today. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. The great emperor smiled. "The heavens and earth are great, but eating is the most important. There's no need to be so polite. Let's eat." Qin Yu thought for a moment and picked up his chopsticks. He couldn't figure out what this Western Wasteland great emperor was planning to do today, so he could only respond by remaining unchanged. The main hall was quiet. There was only the occasional sound of chopsticks and bowls touching, as well as the sound of chewing. For a meeting between a ruler and a subject to appear like this was a rare sight. However, this could also explain why there was no one in the main hall and why there were 2 old eunuchs standing outside. Thinking about it, the Western Wasteland great emperor didn't want the matters between ruler and subject to be known by too many people. He burped and put down his chopsticks. The great emperor took a sip of tea and looked at Qin Yu across from him. "What, you don't like it? This is personally made by the best chef in the imperial palace. It takes a great deal of time and materials, and I don't usually eat it." Qin Yu said, "Your Majesty's imperial chef is naturally unparalleled. It's just that I have something on my mind, so my appetite isn't too good. The great emperor smiled. So that's how it is. I thought you were used to eating the dishes of that madam beside you. So you looked down on the imperial palace's imperial chef. Quietly, with just a few words, the atmosphere in the main hall suddenly changed. Qin Yu stood up and bowed. I have sinned. I have caused trouble for your majesty. The great emperor's eyes flashed. Oh, if you're talking about the matter between Golden Crow and Green Willow Berserker tribes, then you're indeed in quite a bit of trouble. There are enough memorials to impeach you in my study room, and they're enough to fill up a mountain that you can't even breathe. Qin Yu shook his head, a sneer on his face. The aristocratic officials of the court do not know of your majesty's grand plans, so it is only natural that they are gravely mistaken. But this is not why I am asking for forgiveness. He continued to say, in the past, after the incident at the Western Wastelands Emperor Tomb, Yuan Gu tried to seize the palace lantern in my hands. In order to protect myself, I used the aura of the palace lantern to attract the attention of an ascetic cultivator who was chasing me that day, thus leading to Yuan Gu's death. This matter was seen by the demonic sect's chief disciple, the night demon sect's sect master. She seemed to have the ability to see through a person's heart, so I had always been worried about this. Afterwards, the Yi family repeatedly attacked me, as if they had determined that I was the murderer who killed Yuan Gu. Qin Yu paused. Although strictly speaking, they didn't find the wrong person. This matter was a top secret, and no one besides me knew about it. Thus, I began to have my suspicions and borrowed the prestige of 100,000 troops to suppress the demonic sect and forcefully take Little Meaty away. The great emperor smiled. That's it. That's it. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. I also know that the demonic sect is powerful and is the leader of all the sects in the world. This matter will inevitably lead to a counterattack. I have sinned, so I ask your majesty to punish me. The great emperor nodded. It seems that you haven't lost your mind yet. You know that your actions will cause great trouble. The demonic sect's chief disciple has already reported your evil deeds to me. And now, I heard that the demonic sect's little girl has returned to the imperial capital with you. The night demon sect's sect master has also set off for the imperial capital. I presume that he has already arrived at your residence. The great emperor coldly sneered. He looked down at Qin Yu with a faint smile. I ask you, are you panicking? Chapter 1564. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. Your Majesty, I ask that you protect me for the sake of the Western Wasteland and for the sake of your Majesty. Don't let the night demon sect master kill me in a fit of anger. Was he panicking? There was a deep meaning to this. But Qin Yu, he wasn't panicking. Since Little Meaty had asked to follow Qin Yu back to the great, desolate imperial capital on her own initiative, she had naturally made ample preparations. Although the demonic sect's chief disciple was an extreme ruler in terms of cultivation and shrewdness, he was far from being able to compare with that person hidden in space-time. Humph, you have a point. I can help you put in a good word. But whether or not the demonic sect will recognize you as a son-in-law is beyond my control. The great emperor leaned back and stretched out his legs. His posture wasn't dignified, but his eyes became deeper and more obscure, as if they were an unfathomable sea. Speak. I am very interested in what happened after you entered the Western Border Army. Yes, your Majesty. Qin Yu began from the very beginning, recounting his experiences from beginning to end in appropriate detail. When he was in the Goliath tribes, he had already expected that there would be a day like this. The result of his early preparations was that the entire process was flawless, reasonable, and without a single flaw. The Western Wasteland Great Emperor nodded from time to time. He didn't interrupt, nor did he think it was a waste of time. After a long time, Qin Yu bowed. I have finished speaking. If your Majesty has any questions, please speak freely. The Great Emperor rapped a finger on the table. I, the Western Wasteland half-sovereign, once went to see the Mine Curse. Millions of death soldiers were sacrificed as sacrifices. It is indeed incomparably thorny. So how did you manage to break it? Qin Yu cupped his hands together. I must thank your majesty for bestowing the palace lantern upon me. Its aura can naturally restrain the power of the Goliath tribe's curse. Otherwise it would have been impossible for me to smoothly establish myself in the army. As he spoke, he flicked his fingers. The aura of the palace lantern floated in front of him. The great emperor looked at it and nodded. All right, that is the only question I have. Now let's get down to business. What did you do in the Goliath tribes for? Qin Yu solemnly bowed. To complete the heavy responsibility your majesty entrusted to me. Since the western wasteland great emperor knew about the dishes, that meant he had spies in the smuggling team. Qin Yu wasn't surprised by this. In fact, he even thought it was natural. Of course, the existence of spies wasn't enough to know everything. For example, the one who was good at cooking was the root person fabricated by the wine tree, not meaty. The two trees seemed to be right there, and they could be seen just by raising their heads. But in reality, it wasn't as simple as that. In short, if you wanted to see it, you would be able to see it, and vice versa. The blind spot of the great emperor's information gave Qin Yu room to maneuver. Back then, when he discussed the plan with the bitter cultivator Bo-ri, he was already prepared to deal with the western wasteland's inquiries. Qin Yu stood up. Next time, I will lead a team to the barbarians and settle in the Green Willow tribe. There was no need for more. One sentence was enough to explain everything. A sharp light flashed in the western wasteland great emperor's eyes. Up until now, General Jinwu's performance had perfectly matched everything he knew. There were no omissions and everything was explained. Moreover, the answer he gave was perfect enough. Even if the Golden Crow and Green Willow tribes gained power because of the totem, it was just an illusion. After the break world order was set up, once it was activated, it could instantly destroy everything. Thus, the argument of aiding the enemy naturally fell apart. The grand hall fell into silence once more. Qin Yu sat upright, his eyes drooping. He looked at the ground, expressing his respect towards the western wasteland great emperor. He was well aware that his performance was perfect, even better than he expected. But he still hadn't passed the test. Stepping into the palace and facing the great emperor, Qin Yu finally realized that the only thing he needed to do after returning to the imperial capital was to obtain the western wasteland great emperor's true trust. This should be the last time he would be tested. And this test had already begun the moment he received the emperor's decree. The young eunuch, Siwatch City, the lieutenant general's office, and today the ruler and subject sitting together in the hall. All of this was the same. But all of this was only the prelude. He hadn't truly entered the main topic. General Jinwu, Ning Qin. Here, the western wasteland imperial palace was brightly lit at night. The noble atmosphere of the royal family soared into the heavens, inspiring awe in all who saw it. At this time, in the massive imperial capital, the turtles and old turtles, hiding deep in the waters, all opened their eyes to look at the imperial palace. They could clearly feel that vast strength. So in the next moment, in the dazzling night sky above the imperial capital, trillions of stars began to shine down, sprinkling down endless starlight. It illuminated the massive imperial palace, as if it were wearing a sacred robe of starlight. At the same time, a mystical and indescribable aura descended from the heavens. The general's office didn't have a plaque hanging on it. With just a few words, it sent away the overjoyed and excited night demon, sect master. In a room in the rear courtyard, the bored, little Meaty's eyes brightened. She turned her head and subconsciously licked her lips. I've eaten everything in the heavens and earth. You taste the best. What a pity. I can only look at you from afar. How miserable. Little Meaty whispered, her eyes overflowing with light. If one looked carefully, they would discover that there was a bottomless vortex in her eyes, one that could swallow the sun, moon, and stars. To borrow strength from the heavens and ask If this were before, there would definitely be problems. But now it's useless. Gulp, little meaty gulped. Then she sighed and threw herself onto the bed. Sleep, sleep. Once she fell asleep, she naturally wouldn't feel so unbearable. At dusk, the golden general Ningqin was summoned into the imperial palace. Although this matter seemed unremarkable, it had already become the focus of countless people. After waiting for a long time, there was still no movement. Just as everyone was frowning, His Majesty finally responded. So, at this moment, they discovered that His Majesty wasn't trying to protect this golden general Ningqin that he had personally promoted. On the contrary, His Majesty placed a great deal of importance on this matter. It was so important that he didn't hesitate to use his status as a monarch to mobilize the destiny of the country and borrow strength from the heavens to ask. This was heaven's inquisition, and this was clearly something that could only be done with the approval and authorization of the emperor clans. After all, of the monarchs of the world, besides the central wasteland divine prefecture, no one had ever truly grasped absolute authority. Thus, this revealed some incomprehensible information. For instance, this golden general Ningqin, his true identity. This was because the emperor clans absolutely wouldn't allow someone to waste the destiny of the country for a minor matter. Since Heaven's Inquisition had arrived, this meant that this matter concerned Golden General Ningqin, and he indeed had the qualifications to open Heaven's Inquisition. This caused many people to be caught off guard, their eyes filled with shock, regret, and fear. Monarch and minister faced each other, one asking and one answering. At this moment, Heaven's Inquisition had already begun. The one asking was the Western Wasteland Great Emperor, a noble son of heaven of the mortal world. He had temporarily put on a set of divine robes and seemed to possess some of the abilities of the world itself. The person in front of me, I have a question. In the last 2 hours, have you ever lied? The question was precise, and the angle was ingenious. At this time, the Western Wasteland Great Emperor's face was dignified and dignified. His eyes were like a vast sea of stars. An invisible strength of the world covered Qin Yu. This calm question was like the roar of thunder, like a morning bell that struck straight into his mind. Tear apart all disguises, cut off all concealment, only taking out his true heart and exposing it to the world. This was just a question. There was no need for more. Qin Yu's expression was calm. After a brief pause, he slowly said, "None." At this moment, he stood between the strength of the world. Although he seemed calm, the truth was that his entire soul seemed to be suspended between endless thunder. It was like in the next moment he would be instantly pulverized by the power of heavenly thunder. His soul would scatter and he would never be able to reincarnate. The moment Qin Yu replied, trillions of bolts of thunder stormed out, smashing into his soul. Just as he was about to fall into a hopeless situation of death, darkness suddenly appeared above his soul. Like a great mouth, it swallowed up all the thunder that came crashing down. This strike of thunder came in an instant, inconceivably fast. Before a single thought had even formed, 1,000 bolts of thunder had fallen down. But in Qin Yu's perception, this instant was incomparably long and terrifying. It was something he didn't want to experience again. In the skies above, the radiant galaxy returned to tranquility. It was just that the light it emitted was a bit dimmer than before. The veil of starlight covering the surface of the imperial palace was removed. On the opposite side, the great emperor on the praying mat raised his hand and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. He looked tired, but his face revealed an extremely carefree and satisfied smile. Within the territory of the Western barbarians, even Yi Sang had so-called arms, let alone the great emperor of the Western wilderness who controlled 1/9 of the world. Everything that Qin Yu had experienced in the barbarian territory, the great emperor knew far more than he had said. For example, Bo Ri, the ascetic cultivator who walked out of the temple on the mountain of the barbarians. If he didn't have confidence, why would he believe a desolate person? Was it really just because of the palace lantern that he gave to Jin Wu General Ningqin? This reason was obviously not sufficient, because the great emperor knew very well that Bo Ri's appearance must represent an even stronger will. It was the great shaman of Mang Mountain who had always been hiding in the mountains and never stepped out, the only remaining true leader of the Western barbarians. But these questions didn't need to be asked carefully. The things he pointed out before were enough to summarize the whole situation. It was a node that couldn't be ignored. If there was a problem with Jin Wu General, he couldn't escape Jie Tian's questioning. And now, the facts proved that he had a good vision. So, the great emperor of the Western Wilderness was in a very good mood. Across from him, Qin Yu's pale face was covered in sweat after he recovered his composure. The great emperor, who was also pale, smiled even more brilliantly. Ha 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 ha. Loud laughter echoed through the hall. Outside the door, two old eunuchs opened their eyes at the same time, a bit of relief in them. Ningqin, I know that you might be angry or wronged right now, but as long as you seriously think about it, you should be able to understand why I have tested you over and over again. Why I have tested you over and over again. Why I have been so careful. But today, with the name of the Western Wilderness Great Emperor, I can guarantee you that something like this will never happen again in the future. You have already obtained the final trust of me and Western Wilderness. As long as you work diligently and complete the arrangements of the world-breaking command, everything I promised you will become a reality. Qin, you bitterly smiled. He bowed. This subject does not dare. This subject accepts. His complexion was pale and he was covered in sweat. He was frightened. He bitterly smiled at this moment. Everything he said came from his heart. This was because even Qin Yu never imagined that the Western Wilderness would have such methods. They didn't hesitate to damage the destiny of their nation, to borrow the strength of the heavens to ask questions. Luckily, he hadn't reached this step. If the heavens' inquiry had descended upon him before he entered the Western Wilderness Border Army, he feared he would have become a miserable skeleton somewhere in the wilderness, and there was a high chance he would be incomplete. After a moment, the monarch and subjects' memorial ended. Qin, you stepped out of the hall. A night wind blew past him, making him feel as if he had been separated from the world. General Jin, I will see you out. The expressionless old eunuch's tone softened a bit. As he looked at Qin Yu, his eyes were no longer as cold as before. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Thank you. He left the imperial palace and boarded a carriage. Qin Yu sat motionless. He didn't stop the entire way until he arrived at the general's mansion. He got off the carriage and thanked the old eunuch once more. Then he watched as the carriage left and returned to his mansion. Go, invite the madam to my room. In the darkness of the night, the general who had returned from the imperial palace had passed safely. Inviting the madam to congratulate him was a matter of course. This was because everyone knew that since General Jin Qin was able to return from the imperial palace unscathed tonight, none of the previous storms in the imperial capital would be able to touch him. Yes, General. The servants in the mansion respectfully complied, turned around, and quickly left. Little Meaty pushed open the door and closed it behind her. Qin Yu looked up at her, a questioning look in his eyes. Little Meaty nodded. Who? Qin Yu let out a long breath. He slumped down in his chair and gasped for breath, like a drowning man that had been rescued from the depths. At this moment, he was in an extremely distressed state. Across from him, Little Meaty hesitated for a moment. She didn't sneer or ridicule him. Instead, she poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of him. You have already done very well. This wasn't a compliment. It was just a simple statement of fact. When faced with the heavens' inquiry, to guard one's heart from being exposed was difficult, extremely difficult. In another courtyard of the general's mansion, the demonic sect chief, Disciple, stood with his hands crossed behind his back. His eyes were deep and profound as he looked at the night sky above his head. It was hard for him to conceal the surging emotions in his heart. The mist had woken up. He didn't know the reason, nor did he think that this day would come so soon. But without a doubt, there was one thing that Sect Master Night Demon could be sure of. The mist was no longer the person that needed his protection. Deep in his heart, there was indeed a bit of disappointment and frustration. But there was even more emotion that came from the depths of his heart. In the end, he hadn't failed his master's trust. So, why did the mist continue to stay by General Jinqin's side? In addition to the aura that came from the Imperial Palace, Heaven's inquiry, Sect Master Night Demon could naturally judge just how important General Jinqin was from this. Could it be that the mist had suddenly awakened and the Western Wasteland's imperial family valued him so much that they were hiding some unknown secret? He took a deep breath and suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. After a long period of silence, Sect Master Night Demon's eyes brightened. At this moment, he felt as if he had guessed something. If this was true, then it could explain why the mist continued to stay by General Jinqin's side and why she wasn't willing to give an explanation. But he wouldn't act rashly. There was only one chance. He needed the mist to speak, and only then would the long, silent, demonic sect try to do something. On this night, after the Imperial Palace's Heavenly Inquisition, General Jinqin safely returned to his mansion. After this news spread out, there were bound to be many people who wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Chapter 1565 Western Wasteland Imperial Palace, Long Life Temple. The great emperor sat upright with a solemn expression. He looked up at the top of the temple and bowed. Ancestors, please appear. Space trembled slightly, and wisps of smoke and mist appeared from within. They wove together, turning into figures. Although they were blurry, each figure gave off an oppressive feeling. The two looked at each other. There was silence in the temple. The great emperor frowned and said, "I have proven my worth through the facts. Are you still unwilling to lend me a hand?" He took a deep breath. "I know that apart from the central wasteland divine prefecture, the rulers of the great wilderness have their own destinies. If I don't go, there will be a backlash. If there is a calamity in the future, I am willing to bear it. Even if I die, I will open up a new world for my Western Wasteland Imperial clan." He took another deep breath and bowed. "Ancestors, please give me some more time." An obscure and noisy voice sounded out in the temple, making it hard to hear clearly. After a long time, everything gradually fell silent. The misty figures finally made a decision. 100 years. Your Majesty, make good use of it." The clouds and mist dispersed. The great emperor stood up. His eyes narrowed. At this moment, there seemed to be thunder in his eyes. 100 years passed in the blink of an eye for cultivators of the great Tao. This was his last chance. A group of old and decaying people who, because of their greed, restricted the empire's progress, would completely perish. Imperial Zhou. The empire's surname was Zhou, and not Li. Yi family. Everyone in the imperial capital knew that there was only one Yi family in this world. Then, another suddenly appeared and occupied 30% of the army. This was why there was a distinction between the old and the young. Those who called themselves the Yi family were the ones who were older and had higher seniority. The leading figure of the army, the patriarch, narrowed his eyes as he stood in the corridor. He looked up at the sea of stars above his head as it darkened. Behind him were the true descendants of the Yi family. Although there weren't many of them, they held true power. Each one was a great figure in the army. At this time, they stood solemnly, looking at the thin and old figure in front of them. Their eyes were filled with respect and awe, but there was also a dignified expression. They already knew about the Imperial Palace's Heaven's Inquisition and the subsequent results. The Patriarch had summoned them here because he was about to make a move. As far as they could remember, it had been a very long time since the Patriarch had personally gone into battle. However, every time he did, it was a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering event that could change the entire structure of the empire. "You have all entered the ancestral temple to worship the Yi family ancestors and read the Yi family records. Originally, there was only one Yi clan in this world. It was just that the imperial clan needed to keep the empire's military in check, so they allowed the one in the west to also have the surname Yi. The old patriarch's expression was calm, but what he said next was earth-shattering, causing the trusted aides of the Yi family to reveal expressions of shock. This surname has taken away 40% of my Yi family's destiny. It has also cut off any chance of a future dynasty. The 9 desolate region, the wasteland, was divided into 9 realms of Enjo and Tian. The continent was God, and the continent of Tian of divine, of the gods, and Shou, and of the 9 of Chen. In the endless river of time, the remaining 8 regions had all experienced the change of country names and the change of dynasties. For example, the Western Wasteland. Although the name of the empire had never changed, there were already 4 families that shared the empire's fate. Yin Wang Lu Zhou. The current imperial Zhou was only the 4th ruler of the Western Wasteland Empire. Since there were predecessors, there would naturally be successors. The meaning of the patriarch's words was clear. After Imperial Zhou, the Yi family would be the empire. No one knew why he made such a judgment. However, the patriarch never spoke without thinking. Since he said this, there must be a reason. Even though the people of the Yi family were generals in the army and had steady wills, their expressions changed. However, they remained silent. The patriarch turned around and looked at them. Today, I tell you the secret because the time for my Yi family to take back 40% of its fate has finally arrived. Taking back their fate meant that the other Yi family would be doomed eternally. It was difficult. There were 2 great mountains in the army. Although the later Yi family was established later, there were many powerhouses in the family, and the previous family heads were all heroes of their generation. Although their overall strength was slightly inferior to the Yi family, the difference wasn't that great. If they wanted to destroy the later Yi family and cause them to be doomed eternally, they feared that if they weren't careful, they would suffer a backlash. At that time, regardless of what the final outcome would be, there would be a civil war within the Western Wasteland Empire. Thinking of this, the generals of the Yi family couldn't help but frown, a look of contemplation on their faces. The patriarch's eyes revealed a look of praise. To be able to remain calm even after learning of this matter, you are all very good. You have not let me down. The men of my Yi family should have this steadiness that is as steady as a mountain. You don't need to worry too much about this matter. Since I have determined that the time has come, the later Yi family will not be able to stir up any waves. There were 2 great mountains in the army. Ha! A trace of coldness appeared on the patriarch's face. This was nothing more than a dog under the feet of the emperor family, its neck chained. When there was a need to guard the house, it naturally didn't matter. But if one felt that this dog was an eyesore, they only needed to tighten the chain and it would be placed on the chopping block, waiting to be slaughtered. As for where the opportunity came from, today, Heaven's Inquisition in the Imperial Palace was His Majesty's final confirmation. Since General Jinqin had obtained His Majesty's trust, this meant that the entire plan had entered an accelerated stage. The boundary-breaking command was originally an agreement between the Yi family and His Majesty. Thinking of the emperor who liked to sit behind the bead curtain in the imperial palace, the old patriarch felt a surge of admiration in his heart. His Majesty truly had the world in his heart and lofty ambitions. He was well aware that if he joined forces with the Yi family, he would eventually return 40% of their destiny. But the great emperor didn't fear this. He even had the confidence that he could still control everything. Even if the Yi family's destiny was complete, it could only be a sharp blade in his hand. It could cut through the thorns and thorns of the Western Wasteland and open up a prosperous era for 10,000 generations. But besides admiration, there was also a bit of unwillingness in his heart. As for what the future of the world would be like, it was still unknown. Of course, if he didn't have the confidence, the old patriarch wouldn't act rashly. Even if there was only the Yi family left in the western wasteland in the future, it would still be like what His Majesty thought, a sharp blade in the hands of Huang Zhou, fighting Tiger Hall. Today, apart from Yi Bohu, there was no one else here. The lights hadn't been lit. In addition, the stars in the night sky were dim, making this place even darker. There were specks of coldness in the air. As they floated up and down, they invaded one's heart and lungs. It seeped into one's bones, causing a great fear to rise from the depths of one's heart. But Yi Bohu was still calm. His eyes were like the eyes of a true tiger in the dark night, cold and cruel. The barbarian bloodline was born of bitter cultivation. This was a brand passed down from his ancestors that couldn't be changed or erased. When he was young, he had also been confused, pained, and even despaired. But in the end, he had overcome them one by one, turning them into a whetstone that sharpened himself. He had risen step by step until he had the qualifications to come into contact with the true secrets of the family. A long time ago, the Emperor family and the Yi family had completed a transaction. Thus, they took on the surname Yi and became a mountain in the empire's military. The two great Yi families stood opposite each other, shining in the eyes of the outside world. But all of the direct bloodline descendants of the Yi family knew that all of this was only an illusion, a beautiful illusion. It could shatter at any time. At that time, the rear Yi family, the high and mighty rear Yi family, the insufferably arrogant rear Yi family, would become yesterday's yellow flowers, withered leaves in the autumn wind, swept away and thrown into the garbage heap that no one cared about. For countless years, the Yi family had tried again and again. They did their best, they did not fear death, all for the sake of accomplishing more meritorious deeds. They tried to obtain the true trust of the Western Wasteland's Emperor family and eliminate as many of the hidden dangers of the family as possible. They had succeeded, but they had also failed. Their success lay in the fact that their authority in the military grew higher and higher, to the point that they could contend with the Yi family. Their failure was because the Yi family's successive family heads had never truly integrated into the highest level of the Western Wasteland Empire, even if they were the ones who had experienced it. After experiencing the scenery of a mountain peak and tasting the taste of power, no one was willing to live in a precarious situation. They didn't want to be suddenly abandoned in the future, falling into the mud and beyond redemption. And today, heaven's inquisition descended. As the sea of stars darkened, Yi Bohu felt a bone-chilling coldness in the tiger fighting hall. He didn't know what General Jinwu Ningqin, the Emperor family, and the old Yi family were planning. But as one of the military's mountain peaks, he had long since sensed that there was a top-secret cooperation between the Emperor family and the Yi family. General Jinwu had clearly become the executor of this cooperation. Yi Bohu picked up a teacup. The tea had long since gone cold, but he didn't care. He took a sip and narrowed his eyes, a cold chill flashing in them. So, Yi Wangu's death was a warning to him. Thus, he instinctively gave birth to a cruel killing intent. That was because Yi Wangu was indeed the son he valued the most, the future patriarch of the Yi clan according to his original plan. And it was also because of the inexplicable restlessness and fear in Yi Bohu's heart. He wanted to kill General Jinwu Ningqin, so he brazenly attacked. Unfortunately, the final result of this matter wasn't satisfactory. Now that he looked back, it was because he hadn't been able to pay more attention to Yi Wangu. This was what led to today's situation, step by step. Betraying the Western Wasteland was the final and worst choice. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Yi Bohu wasn't willing to take this step. Otherwise, even if the Yi family was saved, their foundation would be destroyed and the number of casualties would be innumerable. He drank a mouthful of cold tea, another mouthful of cold tea, and a third mouthful was drained. A cold line ran down his throat, straight into his chest. Suddenly, a cruel and cold light erupted in the depths of Yi Bohu's eyes. Although the situation before him seemed dangerous, there was actually a weak point. General Jinwu Ningqin. If he died, the the alliance of the Emperor family and the Yi family would inevitably suffer heavy losses. If they could delay for some more time, then once the great and wise emperor in the palace couldn't withstand the pressure of the Emperor family and abdicated, the Yi family would be able to rise from the ashes and usher in a brand new world. To use the death of one person to exchange for the future of the family, this was a transaction that had to be done, no matter the price. Besides the Emperor Palace and the two great Yi families, there was another person in the imperial capital who was suffering a tremendous mental impact. This was the Western Wasteland Emperor, His Highness Saturday Li Ijo. With the descent of Heaven's inquiry, traces of strangeness had already been revealed. He suddenly discovered that the General Jinwu that he relied on as his arm and foundation had become a complete stranger. Like a hammer to the head, his ears rang and his field of vision darkened. Li Ijo sat in a daze in his study. Sometimes he clenched his teeth and sometimes he revealed a dejected expression. He only felt that everything he had done before was simply laughable. Ning Qin was actually His Majesty's person. After a long time, Li Ijo took a deep breath and suppressed the billowing waves in his heart. He stood up and paced back and forth. After a moment, he suddenly said, "Come, go to General Jinwu's residence to deliver his heart. I will pay a visit tomorrow." General Jinwu was His Majesty's person, but there was still a mark on his body that belonged to him. He had to firmly hold on to this point and absolutely couldn't let go. Perhaps the future would be completely different. But there was one point that Li Ijo couldn't figure out. He was sure that Ning Qin was the last straw he could grab onto in this hopeless situation. He wasn't part of His Majesty's plan. Then why did Ning Qin become His Majesty's person? And why did he have the qualifications to cause Heaven's inquiry to descend? The night passed without words. Qin, you didn't know how he finally fell asleep in his extreme fear and weak state. He only felt that his body was incomparably warm and soft, comforting his panic-stricken mind after experiencing Heaven's inquiry. He opened his eyes and looked at the gauze curtain above his head. There was a dazed look in his eyes before he gradually regained his composure. He was still alive. It was good to be alive. He took a deep breath and a faint fragrance entered his nose. His body stiffened. He turned around and let out a sigh of relief, a self-deprecating look on his face. But soon he discovered a problem. A long hair fell on the bed. From the color and aura, it clearly didn't belong to Qinyu. He frowned and reached out to pick it up. Then he placed it under his nose and his complexion changed. It really was her. Qinyu rubbed his temples. Some blurry memories began to appear in his mind. He couldn't help but bitterly smile. He suddenly felt that the fact that he was still alive was indeed something worth rejoicing over. There was no one in the room. It was clear she had already left. Qin sat there in a daze. There was only one question in his mind. Did something happen? But no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't find any memory fragments. Instead, that warmth and softness became more and more vivid in his mind, making him feel a little restless. He looked down and bitterly smiled. Even at this time, she still dared to have such thoughts. She really was audacious. He leapt off the bed and poured himself a cup of tea. Then he clenched his teeth and pushed open the door. If it was a blessing, it wasn't a calamity. If it was a calamity, he couldn't avoid it. Sooner or later, he would be cut by a knife. Then, the first thing he saw was a figure standing in the courtyard with his hands crossed behind his back. Qinyu's pupils shrank. He stopped and frowned, fear in his eyes. The other person turned around, revealing a dignified, middle-aged face. His eyes fell on Qinyu, cold and filled with complex emotions. "General Golden Ning Qin, if you dare to betray my family in the future, I will personally kill you, even if I have to go to the depths of the Yellow Springs." His killing intent boiled. After he finished speaking, he turned and walked away, vanishing from sight. Qinyu's frown deepened. He thought that the dignified Knight Demon Sect Master, the chief elder of the Demon Sect, a peak sovereign realm master, had actually waited for him to wake up just to say some ruthless words. This was simply ridiculous. But soon, Qin Yu seemed to realize something. His body stiffened and his eyes turned dull. As he thought about the ruthless words that the Night Demon Sect Master said just now, he subconsciously licked his lips, his complexion paling. At this time, a maid walked over. She bowed. "General, the madam invites you to breakfast." Qin Yu stiffened even more. He took a deep breath and said, "I asked you last night, where was the madam?" The maid was frightened. She quickly fell to her knees, her voice shaking. "Last night, General returned from the Imperial Palace and invited the madam. Afterwards, we all withdrew." She looked up at Qin Yu, her eyes filled with sorrow and fear. It was clear she was saying, "You slept together all night, so why are you asking me this?" Qin Yu was thoroughly stunned. Chapter 1566. In the general's mansion, breakfast was ready. The air was filled with a rich aroma, and the sound of rumbling could be heard. Each and every one of them had graceful figures and beautiful appearances. Their faces were flushed red, and they felt incredibly ashamed. However, he couldn't help but stare at the vegetables, buns, and porridge on the table. It was a simple breakfast. With the power and influence of the general's mansion, it could even be said to be crude. But this taste, oh, I can't think about it. I really can't think about it. I can't even swallow my saliva. When Qin Yu arrived, this was the scene in front of him. The beauty's stomach rumbled like thunder. It was simply too beautiful. This caused the group of beauties who were drooling and bowing their heads to have the urge to crawl into the cracks in the ground. The corner of little Meaty's mouth curled up, revealing a cold smile that was hard to detect. She waved her hand. "All of you can leave. Listen to the noise." This was simply slapping them in the face. They felt even more ashamed. The maids covered their faces and retreated. Qin Yu coughed. Just as he was about to say something, he was interrupted by a wave of his hand. "Eat first." Feeling guilty, he felt that he had no confidence at all. He nodded obediently and sat down to eat. Of course, before he opened his mouth, Qin Yu already knew that the breakfast on the table in front of him was cooked by the roots. Streams of heat gushed out from his body, spreading to his limbs and bones. Soon he felt his entire body heat up and his face flush red. With a thought, he guessed that the effect of this breakfast was to make up for the loss he had suffered from the Heaven's Inquisition yesterday. Her heart warmed slightly, and then she panicked. First, the sect leader of the Night Demon Sect had spoken harshly to his face. Then, the maidservant had a resentful look in her eyes. Now, little Meaty's attitude towards him had changed. Hiss! Something had happened. Something had definitely happened. Qin Yu panicked and his heart raced. As he looked at the little girl from the demonic sect who was calmly enjoying her breakfast, his eyes became increasingly chaotic. Humph! With a cold laugh, he slammed his chopsticks down on the table. Meaty put down the half-eaten bun in her hand and glared at him hatefully. "Men at the root are all the same. I've treated you well, but you're not used to it? If you want to eat, eat. If you don't, leave now." Qin Yu let out a long breath. He clenched his teeth and said, "Last night, bah! What are you thinking? Don't daydream, okay? I was afraid that you would be scared to death, and that I wouldn't be able to collect my debts, so I looked after you at night." Ro rolled her eyes. "Could it be that you thought that I would take the initiative to run into your bed?" Qin Yu was overjoyed. Thank you. I was wrong. Please forgive me for my rudeness." His appetite was greatly stimulated. He ate 10 buns and 3 bowls of porridge in one go. He felt comfortable and warm all over. Ro had a cold expression on her face. She glanced at him from time to time. "Remember this. You owe me yet again. And this morning's meal." She got up and left. Her face was gloomy and her mood was terrible. Qin Yu patted his belly. His lips curved up in a smile. As long as nothing happened, everything was fine. Otherwise, he really did not know what to do in the future. Moreover, was the person in Meaty's body someone to be trifled with? If he really did touch it, humph, Even if Qin Yu's body was forged from iron, he would likely be eaten up and ground into slag. However, as he thought of that strand of hair, he stopped himself. It must have fallen off when he was moving him onto the bed. That's right, that was it. Outside the courtyard, Ro walked down the corridor. Her complexion became increasingly ugly. She clenched her teeth and muttered to herself. If one listened carefully, it was nothing more than a hee-hee man, nothing new at all. A gust of wind blew past. The surface of the pond outside the corridor began to ripple. The green lotus leaves instantly turned yellow. As they were tossed about by the ripples, they disintegrated into powder. Pieces of white fish rose up from the bottom of the water, floating amongst the withered leaves. It was truly a pitiful sight. His Highness Li Yizhou personally arrived outside the general's residence. For a prince to befriend a high-ranking general of the border army, no matter where one looked in the world, this was an extraordinary crime. If one wasn't careful, there was a chance they would create a great calamity. But towards General Jin, he didn't need to worry too much. In particular, after a sleepless night, he had figured out some things. Li Yizhou felt that it was best to let more people know that he had an unusually close relationship with the Golden General Ningqin. He feared that others wouldn't see enough. "Your Highness, please enter. I will immediately pass on the message." The gatekeeper respectfully bowed. Towards this noble descendant of the heavens, he could only bow and scrape. Li Yizhou smiled and waved his hand. "There's no need. I will wait here. You can go pass on the message." The gatekeeper wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He didn't dare to delay any longer. He turned and ran away. Soon, the general's residence opened. Qin Yu stepped out and cupped his hands together. "Greetings, Your Highness." Li Yizhou carefully looked at him and then laughed. "Ningqin, good job. You didn't lose any face for me." He waved his hand. "Bring up the gift. Today, I want to drink a few cups with General Jin and share my thoughts with him." Qin Yu smiled and nodded. "If Your Highness is in the mood, then I will accompany you. Please." Li Yizhou was the sixth highness of the Western Wilderness. Relatively speaking, he had the deepest karmic ties with Qin Yu. When the two of them were in the broken world, they had fought many times. Unfortunately, even now, when they met again, this highness still didn't know. Of course, it was for the best that he didn't know. Otherwise, if this man in front of him turned around, he feared he would turn into a war of words. Although Qin Yu had already obtained the trust of the Western Wilderness Great Emperor, his intuition told him that Li Yizhou might still be useful in the future. The first guest to arrive at the general's residence was the Western Wilderness Great Emperor, His Highness Zhou. Although he was only the sixth, he had experienced many ups and downs and still stood tall. It was said that in the imperial capital there were some signs that this sixth highness was a late bloomer. With the previous desolate emperor holding him in high regard, he might have a chance to rise up and become a dragon. In short, in the eyes of the servants in the residence, the first guest of the residence truly had a great deal of weight. The banquet began, and all sorts of delicacies were delivered into the main hall. Of course, this time, it wasn't the root person personally cooking. Li Yizhou didn't have the face to do so. Of course, this sixth highness wasn't the same today. He really came here to eat and drink. What he cared about was General Jin's attitude. Even if he only drank a cup of water, if he remained the same as before, that would be 1,000 times better. The results were mixed. General Jin still recognized the friendship between the two of them, but compared to the past, there was a bit more distance between them. It wasn't obvious, but it was still noticeable. As the saying went, the world changed with time. When the Dark Ruler first entered the Western Wilderness, he naturally couldn't compare with his current status as an important general of the border army. The change in his attitude was within his expectations, so he told the truth. Li Yizhou, who got the result, was even happier now. What he was truly worried about was how to continue befriending General Jinqin in the future. As a prince trapped in the imperial capital, There were far too few promises he could make to a general of the border army. Between people, if they weren't close, they were far apart. After the banquet ended, and leaving behind a pile of gifts, Li Ijo stood up and bid his farewells. As he boarded the carriage, he held onto Qin Yu's arm and said with the help of his wine, "I hope General doesn't forget the past." As he watched the carriage leave, Qin Yu's expression was calm. He knew that the reason Li Ijo came here today was to say these words. But unfortunately, from the very start, the two of them were destined to walk different paths. Thus, there was no such thing as past. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the carriage drove away from the gathering place of the eastern city. The general's residence that was unscathed by heaven's inquisition seemed calm and tranquil. But the truth was that it had become the focus of everyone's attention in the imperial capital. Li Ijo's actions naturally affected the hearts of the people. It wasn't that no one tried to take the initiative to express their friendliness before the dust settled, but they couldn't find a suitable reason to do so. And, given how highly His Majesty regarded General Jinqin, it wasn't necessarily beneficial to privately befriend him. If it weren't for the many scruples in their hearts, the general's residence would have been filled with guests today. There wouldn't be any peace and quiet right now. Without stopping, the carriage returned to the palace. The Sixth Highness reeked of alcohol, and his face was flushed red. He waved his hand to indicate that he was fine and returned to his chambers alone. After dismissing the maids and attendants, Li Ijo's eyes brightened. Although he still reeked of alcohol, he didn't seem drunk at all. He took a deep breath and bowed. "Your son Li Ijo asks your majesty to descend." Space trembled and a phantom appeared. The figure behind the bead curtain that seemed impossible to see clearly spoke up. "How is it?" Li Ijo said, "Reporting to your majesty, your son paid a visit to General Jin Wu today and drank with him in the hall. I have determined that his essence energy is complete and that he hasn't suffered any damage." As he spoke, he took out something from his chest and offered it up with both hands. Looking at this object with the naked eye, it looked like a bubble-like bead. Its surface was incomparably smooth, like a mirror that could clearly reflect its surroundings. Although it didn't seem remarkable, the truth was that it was an extremely precious and wondrous object. It formed its own rules and could quietly record everything that occurred in front of it. No matter how high or low the cultivation of the target was, they wouldn't be able to detect it. "I understand." The voice behind the bead curtain sounded out once more. The bead vanished on its own, and the trembling space returned to normal. "Who?" Li Ijo let out a long breath. In just a few short questions and answers, his forehead was already covered with beads of sweat. He lifted a hand to wipe his face and poured himself a cup of tea. After drinking it all, he still felt his heart palpitate. Before, when he boarded the carriage, it seemed as if he had borrowed the strength of the wine to say some heartfelt words to General Jin Wu. But these words were also said to the person who would be looking through the stainless net bead later. It was just that he didn't know what the result of this gamble would be. Li Ijo bitterly smiled. He could only hope that it wasn't the worst-case scenario. Imperial Palace. Behind the bead curtain, the great emperor carefully looked over the bead. The stainless net bead recorded everything. His fingers pressed down a little, and with a light cracking sound, the bead shattered without a trace remaining. Like wisps of smoke, it vanished from sight. He let out a breath, his eyes as calm as a lake. In the Longevity Temple, the great emperor of a country who wielded supreme authority had solemnly promised that he wouldn't doubt Qin Yu in the slightest. But the facts proved that although the words of the rulers of the world were somewhat sincere, they couldn't be completely trusted. General Jin Wu Ningqin. Since his essence energy was complete today, it was impossible for him to deceive the heavens. There was no mistake about heavenly inquiry. A sharp light burst out from the depths of the great emperor's eyes. He seemed to sense something and stood up. "Does great elder have any objections?" After several breaths of time, a light sigh sounded out in the air. "Everything shall be as your majesty says. No, the great emperor had no expression. As the son of heaven, I temporarily control the destiny and authority of the western wasteland. I am a saint amongst mortals, and my words are the law. Last night, I promised General Jinwu that I would no longer doubt him. But today's actions are the same as slapping myself in the face. I have no face left. He looked up, his eyes becoming even calmer, like an endless sea. Could it be that great elder believes that I don't need any compensation for my face? The air was quiet. After several breaths of time, the aura faded away. The western wasteland great emperor sat behind the bead curtain, his white face and beard curved up in a light smile. Since he didn't say anything, that was tacit approval. General Jinwu Ningqin, since I broke my promise to you, I will naturally compensate you. I believe that in the future, when you learn of what happened today, you will also be satisfied. Qin Yu wasn't satisfied. The stainless net bead was indeed mysterious. It didn't emit any aura at all, almost forming its own rules that could record everything that happened in front of him. No matter how high or low one's cultivation was, it was impossible to detect. But in this world there were no absolutes. That mysterious existence hidden within his body, hidden in space-time, was clearly not one of them. Although she hadn't seen Li Zhou, she was here. Besides the most hidden and obscure place in the imperial palace, she could sense everything. She coldly sneered, and with just a few words, she exposed Qin Yu's predicament of being schemed against. Thinking back to when he faced Li Zhou, he felt a bit of regret that he didn't know he was in front of an old friend. It was really shameful. But this also caused Qin Yu to be even more cautious. The world was vast, and there were always many mysterious and unheard of methods. Even if it was an unremarkable person, he still couldn't underestimate them. Otherwise, he might suffer great loss. At the same time, he felt a bit more gratitude towards that mysterious existence hidden within his body. If it weren't for her taking precautions ahead of time and using breakfast to make up for the loss of essence energy he suffered from Heaven's Inquisition last night, he feared he would have aroused the suspicions of the imperial palace. Although this wasn't enough to overturn Heaven's Inquisition's conclusion, Qin Yu's future actions would inevitably be more difficult, and there would inevitably be more twists and turns. This was the so-called human heart was made of flesh. How could it be made of iron or stone? Although Qin Yu still had great misgivings towards this mysterious existence hidden in space and time who had inexplicably appeared and inexplicably had a favorable impression of him, as he walked step by step to where he was today, he couldn't help but feel a little closer and more trusting. Although he was clear-headed, he still couldn't completely control his own mood. Little Meaty rolled her eyes at him and then stood up to leave. There's no need to say words of gratitude. This sort of thing that doesn't cost me anything isn't worth anything at all. If you really want to thank me, then think about how you'll repay your debt. She clenched her teeth. She had invested time and time again, but there was no return at all. She felt depressed in her heart, but at the corners of her lips, there was a smile that even she didn't notice. Light and cheerful. Night. The imperial palace issued a decree, and an angel arrived at the general's residence. Along with the imperial decree was a giant plaque. Although it was covered by a veil, it was still difficult to hide its sharpness and vast aura. General Ningqin of the Golden Empire has conformed to the emperor's heart and performed meritorious deeds for the country, is promoted to third-class Marquis Loyal Marshal. He will also be granted the title of Secretary of the Ministry of Military Affairs, and will be a general of the same rank. The imperial decree's contents were simple. Although it was only a few sentences, the contents were filled with a grand atmosphere. Imperial Zhou had ruled the western wastelands and learned from the lessons of the previous dynasty. They severed the title of Marquis, and that was the pinnacle of officials. Looking at the western wastelands, unless one had performed a massive meritorious deed for the country, only then would they have the qualifications to be granted the title of Marquis. Even someone as noble as the Yi family's old patriarch and the Yi family's Yi Bohu, who controlled 2 mountains in the army, was only a first-class marquis. Although he was 2 levels lower, Qin Yu had only entered the Western Wastelands court for a short period of time, and the speed at which he was promoted was simply mind-boggling. After the imperial decree was read, the eunuch in the imperial palace's study put on a friendly smile. He cupped his hands together and said, "Marquis Loyal Marshal, please rise and receive the decree. I have served Imperial Zhou for many years, but this is the first time I have seen a marquis of your age. Your future prospects are limitless. If there is a chance in the future, I ask that marquis look after the servant." Qin Yu received the decree. He calmly bowed. "Eunuch is too polite. Please come to my residence and have some tea." The eunuch waved his hand. "There is no rush, there is no rush. I still have matters to attend to. Marquis, since you have received the imperial decree, you should also receive the plaque." There was a look of envy in his eyes that couldn't be concealed. "This is something personally written by His Majesty. It is a transcendent glory. Who knows how many great figures in the imperial capital have bitterly begged for this for many years." Qin Yu faced the imperial palace and bowed once more. "This subject is General Jin Wuning. I thank your Majesty for this generous gift." No matter how he felt, this attitude was indispensable. The veil was lifted to reveal a pure black plaque with golden cloud patterns. The words written on it were General Jin Wu. In the lower right corner, in a seemingly unremarkable place, there was a line of small golden characters. This was the residence of a great general of the same rank, a 3rd rank Marquis Loyal Marshal, the Ning family. An imperial decree, a marquis of 3 ranks. The imperial capital's attention was shaken. Chapter 1567. When Heaven's Inquisition descended, the insignia General Ning Qin was safe and sound. This alone was enough to prove that there was nothing wrong with his actions. Since this turmoil couldn't harm him in the slightest, whether it was out of appeasement or the revenge of His Majesty in the imperial palace against the various forces in the imperial capital, the storm that was stirred up would naturally become a boost that would push Jin Wu to the next step. As the saying goes, riding the wind and soaring into the clouds, the insignia General Ning Qin's promotion still left countless turtles and turtles in the deep waters of the imperial capital dumbfounded. 3rd class Marquis of Loyalty. Moreover, he was a great general of the same rank, a great general with military power. Looking at the court, how many officials could suppress him? Of course, there were definitely some. For example, the 2 great Yi families, Prime Minister Han of the imperial court, the secretary of the military department, and the several powerful princes of the emperor clans. But thinking of this, no one felt relaxed. Instead, the bitter smiles on their faces became even deeper. This was because these people were the true big shots of the imperial court. They were the indisputable super thighs of the Western Wasteland Empire. Suddenly, they discovered that the insignia General Ning Qin, who came from the broken world and had an ordinary cultivation, was now a high official. This caused those who worked hard in the court to grind their teeth and their eyes to turn red. But now, those who were still envious were the lucky ones in the court. Those ministers who had jumped out early on to criticize the golden generals with fierce words and petition the great emperor to punish them now had bitter expressions on their faces, as if they were about to drip tears. Since the insignia general was fine and had instead been promoted, becoming the Marquis of the Western Wasteland, then they were doomed. In the rear palace of the imperial palace, to the southeast of the pavilions, there was a fragrance hall. This was the residence of a favored noble lady. This noble lady had a natural body fragrance. It was light and strong, able to stir one's heart and help with cultivation. After being summoned to the imperial palace, she had been promoted 3 times in 5 years. From a small palace maid, she had become a noble lady who occupied a side palace in the imperial palace. There were rumors that if noble Lady Xiang was pregnant, the position of a concubine would be as easy as pie. She would truly become a character that couldn't be underestimated. After all, the most powerful type of wind in the world was pillow talk. If it was used well, once it was brought out, it would be able to decide the matter with a single strike or turn the tide. In short, it would be able to look down on everyone. However, the atmosphere in the fragrance-smelling hall today was rather gloomy. Firstly, His Majesty was busy with government affairs and hadn't been here for half a month. Secondly, the noble lady, who had always been sweet and amiable and had a gentle temperament, had recently been in a bad mood and had punished 2 palace maids who had caused trouble. Although it couldn't be considered to be severe, it was still covered in blood, causing everyone's hearts to tighten, and they became even more cautious as they walked. They were deeply afraid that if they made the slightest movement, they would suffer an unexpected calamity. Eunuch Wei. The 2 palace maids bowed respectfully. It was not only because he was the leader of the eunuchs in the smelling hall, but also because he had read the imperial edict on behalf of the emperor not long ago. Among the eunuchs, this was a great honor, not to mention that Eunuch Wei had personally summoned Ning Qin. Even if they were in the harem, they could still hear a few words about this new marquis's fame. With Eunuch Wei's kindness and ability to socialize, they had probably already established a good relationship during their journey together. With this background, coupled with Eunuch Wei's young age, it wasn't impossible for him to become one of the most powerful eunuchs in the palace in the future. Just like that eunuch who by His Majesty's side, how awe-inspiring! Thinking of this, the 2 palace maids blushed and looked at Eunuch Wei with a hint of charm in their eyes. In the imperial palace, the long night was unbearable. There were always some pitiful people who came together to comfort each other. But today, Eunuch Wei wasn't in the mood to talk to the 2 beautiful palace maids. He nodded and walked away, causing the 2 young palace maids to look at his back, unable to help but reveal a bit of sadness. Wei Wei greets master. After reporting, he entered the room, knelt down, and respectfully kowtowed. Noble Fragrance was leaning on the soft couch, looking at him with a complicated look in her eyes. She softly said, "Get up. I told you to deliver something to the residents. Is everything all right at home?" Wei Wei said, "Noble can rest assured that the old man and madam are doing well. He told me to pass on a message to you to serve father in peace and that there is no need to worry about them." After a moment of hesitation, he revealed a smile. "When I returned to the residence, this servant received a reward from the old man. He said that there were several jars of wine that your highness personally made when she was young and buried underground for many years. It was only when you were bestowing the title of noble that you took them out. There is still some left, so he gave this servant a jar." Noble Fragrance's complexion changed. She frowned and her eyes darkened. "Father is really muddle-headed. How can he give this wine that I personally brewed to a servant?" Her eyes were cold. "Wei Wei, leave the wine in the palace. You can leave. In the future, don't come to my side. Just do your work outside." The several palace maids waiting on the side all widened their eyes in shock. They thought that it was just a jar of wine. Even if it was personally brewed by a noble, they shouldn't ignore the always trusted Eunuch Wei just because of such a small matter. Their hearts filled with fear and unease. The palace maids lowered their heads, feeling their hearts tremble. Wei Wei knelt on the ground. A complex light flashed in his eyes. Then he took a deep breath and revealed a decisive look. He took out a jar of wine and placed it on the ground with both hands. He respectfully bowed to Noble Fragrance. "Your Highness, take care. This servant will leave now." The eunuchs in the imperial palace were all crippled and pitiful worms. In the past, when the little palace maid first entered the palace, she was often bullied. One day, the pitiful worm took a beating for the little palace maid, and the 2 became closer. Then, after some years, the little palace maid obtained His Majesty's favor and was slowly bestowed the title of noble. The pitiful worm also became a moderate character in this imperial palace. At the very least, he was no longer bullied by others and now had the qualifications to bully others. As Wei Wei walked out of the fragrant fragrance hall, He turned his head and revealed a gratified look. Even if you have become a high and lofty noble now, you are still that timid and timid little Pallas maid to me. This was good, this was enough. In the past, the pitiful worm and the little Pallas maid had talked about everything. Perhaps he remembered the noble's childhood experiences more clearly than the noble. There was no way he could personally brew wine. The old master's reward was likely to send him on his way. Wei Wei smiled and straightened the eunuch hat on his head. Although he was a cripple, he wouldn't harm his friends. After returning to his residence, Wei Wei sent away several pitiful worms who came to ask for information. As he watched them leave in a panic, he thought of something and smiled. Then he closed the door. One day later, in the middle of the night, the door opened from the outside with a loud click. 2 black-clothed men came in from the outside and immediately saw Wei Wei lying on the table. There was still a faint fragrance of wine in the air, but the dishes on the table had already turned cold. It was as if Wei Wei had fallen asleep on the table. "Humph! You unappreciative eunuch!" One of the black-clothed men cursed. Then he sneered, "Do you think you can help your master escape this calamity by committing suicide? In your dreams!" He stepped forward and kicked Wei Wei's cold corpse to the ground. The other man frowned. "Enough. He's already dead. Why ruin his corpse and ruin your own virtue?" He looked around the room and waved his hand. "Go and put the things away. We're leaving." The first black-clothed man resentfully stopped. He took out several things from his chest and flashed into the inner room. Looking at Wei Wei's corpse, the black-clothed man revealed a trace of admiration. It was beyond his expectations that there would be eunuchs who didn't care about their own lives. After a moment of hesitation, he flicked his sleeves, and an invisible force lifted Wei Wei back onto the table. This was all he could do to restore some semblance of dignity to this eunuch. "Let's go." The 2 black-clothed men turned and left. The door quietly closed. The next day, news of the eunuch chief of the Fragrance Palace, Wei Wei, committing suicide to escape punishment was exposed. The imperial palace guards personally took over and found several forbidden items in his room, although they didn't know what they were. Rumors said that they were related to witchcraft. Witchcraft was real witchcraft. In this world where there were gods, this was an extremely terrifying method. It had always been a forbidden, evil, secret technique in the palace. Anyone who was involved in it would be punished with extreme punishment. The Fragrance Palace was in chaos. Wails could be heard everywhere. The imperial palace guards rushed in and pulled away all the palace maids and eunuchs. They knelt neatly outside the palace. Then, sword light flashed and heads rolled to the ground. The smell of blood assailed the nostrils. Soon, eunuchs with pale faces rushed in with buckets of water to wash the blood on the ground. Inside the palace, Noble Xiang's face was pale. She held a handkerchief in her hand. Her eyes were blank and empty. It was as if she was extremely frightened and numb. "Noble Xiang, His Majesty has decreed that you should stay in the Fragrance Palace from now on. You can't take a step out without an imperial edict," one of the imperial palace guards said with a cold face. Without waiting for a response, he turned around and left. "Close the entrance and seal it. Lock the connection between the inside and outside." Noble Xiang's body trembled and slowly came to her senses. Listening to the clanking sound, she closed her eyes and shed tears. "You clearly know that I let you go. Why do you still want to die here?" The matter of Noble Xiang in the harem involving witchcraft broke out. The palace was purged in one day. Heads were killed, and the smell of blood assailed the nostrils. Outside the imperial palace, the action had begun. Noble Xiang's father, the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Works, was directly deprived of his 5th-grade official position and put into the prison of the Ministry of Justice. Days later, the cry of the minister-counselor was loud. All the young and strong men were taken into custody, and the women were temporarily locked up in the musical house to await further punishment. Those who dared to resist were killed without mercy. Soon, after only one night, the minister-counselor in the prison of the Ministry of Justice could not stand the torture and bid out several people involved in the harem witchcraft. Their official positions were not high, but they were very clever. They were almost everywhere in the imperial court. This time, everyone smelled a strange aura. Another 2 days later, a deputy general in the army was involved in this matter. Before the Ministry of Justice came, the deputy general committed suicide at home, which seemed to cut off the clue. However, only half a day later, a high-ranking official in the military who had a high position and was given the title of deputy privy general was deprived of his official position and put into prison. It seemed to be earth-shattering, but also like a stone coming to the bottom of the river. All the people in the capital had been searching for so long and finally found the direction of the knife. This deputy privy general was quite influential in the military. The reason why he could be popular was that he had an extremely powerful background. The Empress Yi family, Yi Bohu, had personally given him the position of deputy privy general, which was not a secret in the capital. Thinking of the dead head of the eunuchs in the smelling hall, not long ago, it happened to be the person who read the emperor's decree to recall General Jean. The meaning of this was profound. For a time, everyone in the capital was in a panic. Even the old bastards in the deepest part of the pond could not help but open their eyes. They thought, after Heaven's Inquisition, our emperor has finally won some time for himself. What is he doing now? Mount Hung in the military, the old and the Empress Yi family were all the cornerstones of the empire. To waver without permission was to harm the foundation of the empire. How could the elders of the emperor clans allow such a thing to happen? But the imperial palace was silent. It was clear that they tacitly approved of what was happening in the outside world. As for the Minister of Justice, when he first entered officialdom, he married a woman surnamed Yi. She was not beautiful, but she was actually quite virtuous. Dark clouds hung low, threatening to destroy the city. Loyal marquis mansion. The tumultuous events in the outside world certainly couldn't involve Qin. But everyone knew that he was the one who started this storm. Upon hearing that the young eunuch had died, Qin had a calm expression. This was because on that day outside the capital region, when he saw this person leave, Qin had sensed death energy lingering around his body. It was clear that from that time onwards, Wei Wei already knew his fate. Within the capital, as the deputy privy general of the military was imprisoned, the turmoil that began with the witchcraft insect incident in the imperial palace had completely transformed into a storm that swept through the western wasteland court. Waves, private deals, forming cliques for private gain, disregarding the laws of the nation, corruption, and bribery. This was a massive attack that involved countless high officials of the court. But anyone with a discerning eye could see that those who were unlucky today were the ones who charged to the front during the impeachment of General Jean. But it was impossible for His Majesty to set off such a great storm in the court just to help General Jean vent his anger. Then, if one continued to think about it, they would arrive at the root cause that even the old bastards in the deep waters found incomparably thorny. These people, whether they were in the open or in the dark, directly or indirectly, most of them had inextricably linked relationships with the later Yi family. Qin Yu was happy to see the later Yi family suffer misfortune. He didn't even mind throwing a large stone down when he had the chance. Hitting someone while they were down didn't sound good. But if you want to kill me, do you still want to be a gentleman? That would be foolish. But as he thought about it again and again, Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He couldn't help but rub his eyebrows. The later Yi family, even if they were only a dog chained up in the hands of the Western Wasteland's imperial family, this dog was far too strong. It had lived for countless years, and its roots were spread throughout the entire Western Wasteland. In the army, it had countless trusted aides that held great authority. So, even if the master wanted to kill this dog and eat its meat, this wasn't something that could be done casually. Otherwise, why would a scandal like the harem witchcraft erupt and then indirectly attack them from another angle? Simply put, the later Yi family would likely find it hard to escape this calamity. But this absolutely wasn't something that could be accomplished overnight. In order to prevent a dog from jumping over a wall and suffering a backlash, the chains around the later Yi family's neck would become tighter and tighter. The chain around the neck of the Yi family would definitely be pulled tighter and tighter. But until the very last moment, they would be given a chance to breathe. This caused Qin Yu to worry about his own safety. No one was a fool. He didn't believe that the dignified later Yi family wouldn't be able to sense the little secret between him and the old Yi family. So, as long as he killed him, he could ruin the chess game in front of him. It was a simple matter. To the later Yi family, they wouldn't hesitate to pay any price to do this. The more he thought about it, the more bitter his smile became. Qin Yu took a deep breath and left. He felt that for the next few days, he should temporarily go rest in the madam's courtyard. Later Yi family, Tiger Quarrying Hall. The imperial capital was in a precarious situation. As the target of public criticism, everyone in the hall had a heavy expression. The atmosphere was suffocating. As a direct descendant of the family, they naturally knew that their family was different from others. They also thought that someday in the future, a great calamity would descend upon them. But no one imagined that this day would come so quickly and so suddenly. With the sound of footsteps, everyone subconsciously lowered their heads and straightened their backs. Yi Bohu stepped forwards. His expression was calm and his face was as firm as a rock. Patriarch! Everyone bowed in unison. Yi Bohu walked to the master's seat across from them and sat down. His eyes swept over everyone. Rise. Yes. Without any hesitation, Yi Bohu went straight to the point. The current storm in the imperial capital is not a fluke. It is indeed aimed at us. The Tiger Quarrying Hall fell, deathly silent. Everyone gnashed their teeth. Some revealed looks of anger, and some were as still as a lake. Does the Western Wasteland's emperor family really want to betray us? Aren't they afraid that my later Yi family will revolt and turn the world upside down? Yi Bohu looked at the person who spoke and coldly sneered, "Idiot! Our family has been chained from the start. As dogs, we must have the awareness of a dog. Rebelling against the Western Wasteland is the worst possible move, but it is still too early to speak of it." Another person said, "Patriarch, the Emperor family, and the old Yi family have clearly joined forces. If we do not resist, then even if we have a deep foundation, we will still be killed off bit by bit." Yi Bohu said, "As long as a great tree lives for a long time, its roots will drill into the rock and spread through every corner. If we do not want to leave behind a disaster in the future, we must uproot it. This is a matter that takes time. If we are too hasty, then the result will be a landslide." He let out a deep breath and lightly said, "Our Majesty does not wish to see this happen, so there is still time. Patriarch, this general requests for the execution of General Jinwu Ningqin." At the entrance to the Tiger Quarrying Hall, a person stood up from the last seat on the right. His voice was calm, but it was filled with sharp killing intent. Although he was seated at the end of the table, that didn't mean he was the weakest. This fellow came from a side branch of the later Yi family, but had managed to cultivate the true body of the Goliath. When he went crazy in the past, the strength he erupted with was astonishing. In these past years, he had stayed in the imperial capital and hadn't taken half a step out of the later Yi family's residence. No one had seen him personally fight, but no one dared to underestimate him in the least. A sharp light flashed in Yi Bohu's eyes. He lifted a hand and pointed at Yi Gui. "If you can see the crux of the problem, then His Majesty in the imperial palace, that old tiger of the later Yi family, will naturally have a response. I fear he is just waiting for us to take action. We must kill Qin Yu, but we cannot be the ones to do it." He paused for a moment and then said, "At the very least, we must maintain our silence in the imperial capital." Yi Gui furrowed his eyebrows. He turned and sat down. He had always been quiet and had a cold temperament. Everyone was used to his rude actions. "The reason I have gathered you here today is to tell you that you cannot rely on luck in your hearts. My later Yi family has indeed reached a moment of life and death. But there is one more point. I want you to know that the roots of my later Yi family are deep and long enough. It won't be so easy to exterminate them. Leave. Do not act rashly and do what you are supposed to do. Although the storm has arrived, it won't reach Tiger Quarrying Hall for some time. His calmness was filled with confidence. Yes, we will take our leave. Everyone stood up and bowed before leaving in a single file. Yi Gui didn't move. He stayed behind. Yi Bohu glanced at him and furrowed his eyebrows. When I need you to help, I will naturally ask. Yi Gui lightly said, I have already waited for many years. He stood up and left, his back like a mountain. In the past, if it weren't for the grace of his family suppressing him, he would have committed suicide. The reason he had kept his life was to repay the later Yi family for raising him. At this time, wind and rain swayed. Chapter 1568. Some people say that prostitutes and assassins are the two oldest and strongest professions in this world, regardless of whether these words were right or wrong. At the very least, they had always existed in this world and had never truly disappeared. At most, it would be under a different name and wearing a different shell. Hui Chui Pavilion was the strongest assassin organization in the great wilderness. Not one of them. The name was ordinary and even sounded like it was from the Jianghu. It did not look grand or majestic, but in reality, Hui Chui Pavilion was extremely terrifying. Their motto had always been that as long as they paid a high enough price, they would be able to kill a sufficiently strong target. This strong did not only refer to strength, but also status, identity, and so on. In short, as long as they could afford it, Hui Chui Pavilion wouldn't dare to kill anyone. In the past, countless incidents, big and small, had proven this point. Otherwise, Hui Chui Pavilion would not have been able to achieve its current status. The most shocking rumor was that 3,000 years ago, the Southern Wasteland's great emperor suddenly died of an illness. It was rumored that it was the Jadeite Pavilion's doing. Regarding this matter, the Southern Wasteland naturally did not admit to it. However, it did not pursue the matter any further, as if it was beneath its dignity to use the life and death of a dignified emperor to increase its reputation. Hui Chui Restaurant neither admitted nor denied it. The seemingly normal attitude of both parties caused quite a number of people to be secretly fearful. Previously, it was said that the relationship between assassins and prostitutes was a matter of occupation. However, no one would have thought that in a wide alley in the southwest of the Western Baron Imperial capital, there was a brothel with red lanterns hanging high in the sky and countless guests. It was one of the facades of Hui Chui Restaurant. After a long while, when the panting gradually calmed down, the guest who had been tormented in the middle of the night turned over and got up. Drenched in sweat, the woman's face was flushed red. Her eyes were tender and charming as she propped up her sore body and helped the guest dress up. The guest who had been intimate with her on the bed a moment ago had an indifferent expression on his face as he pushed open the door and left. The woman wiped the sweat from her forehead and turned around to sit on the bed. She gently stroked her palm and caught a green jade cicada. The carving was exquisite and lifelike, as if it would flap its wings and fly in the next moment. The woman got up and walked behind the screen at the end of the bed. She sat on the toilet and peed. Then, she casually threw the jade cicada into the copper pipe used for ventilation. The tinkling sounds that followed were drowned out by the sound of pearls falling on jade plates and quickly disappeared. Old Ye's family. On the night of Heaven's questions, the old clan head, who had shown off his brilliance, returned to his old, doddering appearance. However, in the depths of his eyes, there would occasionally be a glimmer of light that caused one's heart to tremble. Yi Bohu is the one with the most potential, strategy, and wisdom among the later generations of the Yi family. This old man also has many unfathomable things about him. Therefore, even though the imperial capital is in a precarious situation, it will remain stable for a short period of time. Picking up the kettle and watering the flowers and plants, The old patriarch's expression was calm. "Send out 10 of our iron guards to guard General Jean." The general behind him bowed, turned around, and strode away. The strength of the old Yi family's iron guards might not be at the peak, but when the 10 of them joined forces, they could even fight a peak sovereign realm expert. Even if they couldn't kill him, they definitely wouldn't be able to stop him for a while. In the imperial capital, as long as they hindered him a little, no one would be able to touch General Jinwu. The old patriarch's arrangements were just right. The imperial palace, behind the bead curtain, the great emperor was handling government affairs. He had always been diligent, never slacking off for a day since ascending to the throne. The sky-bearing monarch bowed. "Your Majesty, the Yi family has sent out 10 iron guards. They are already outside the Zhongwu Manor." The corner of the great emperor's mouth curved into a smile. He stopped writing and muttered, "Yi Bohu will assess the situation and not cause a big commotion. However, with his murderous nature, he will definitely make a move. Success or failure isn't important. What's important is that the Yi family wants to use this matter to send some messages to the outside world. For example, although it's good to kill a dog and eat its meat, a little carelessness can lead to big problems." The great emperor leaned back, his smile growing. "Simply put, it's to give me a warning." The sky-bearing monarch thought for a moment. "Your Majesty is wise." "It's such a simple matter." "Sky-bearing monarch, your flattery isn't very sincere." The great emperor laughed a few times. "Go to the secluded pavilion and pass on my edict. Choose Ding and Wu and appoint them to General Jinwu. They will be by his side in the future." Yi Bohu's action was indeed a warning, but it was necessary to be cautious to avoid trouble. Wearing thick robes and having 4 claws under his abdomen was the origin of the 4th claw. As the lowliest eunuch in the imperial palace, it was amazing that he wasn't purged after the change of dynasties and instead wore the robes of an official. Therefore, according to the martial monarchs, the seemingly ordinary 4th claw was actually an impressive figure. They cultivated an extremely secretive technique of the imperial palace called the heavenly silkworm scripture. Their incomplete bodies were actually the most suitable for cultivating. Of course, not all eunuchs in the imperial palace had this qualification. For example, Wei Wei, who tried to kill himself but still couldn't save his master, was far from being qualified to receive this inheritance. The sky-bearing monarch personally came to visit. Behind him, the 2 stooped 4th claw had their heads lowered as if they would fall asleep at any moment. "Greetings, sky-bearing monarch." Qin Yu cupped his hands together and bowed. Beside him, true Saint Baitu was even more respectful. Zhou, Qingtian smiled. "Marquis Zhongwu, I came here today on His Majesty's orders to send the 2 4th claw here." "Greetings, Marquis." The 2 4th claws opened their eyes aslit and cupped their hands casually with an attitude that could not be considered respectful. Qin Yu frowned. "Sky-bearing monarch, this is?" "Zhou," Qingtian said. "There have been many storms in the imperial capital recently, and His Majesty is worried about Marquis Zhongwu's safety. The 2 4th claw are trusted aides of the imperial palace and can be trusted. Marquis Zhongwu can order them around without worry." Subordinate Ning Qin, "Thanks, Your Majesty." Qin Yu bowed towards the direction of the imperial palace. He stood up, a smile on his face. "I am indebted to Marquis' care in the past. How about staying here as a guest?" Zhou Qingtian smiled. "It's not that I don't want to, it's that I can't. I still have some matters to attend to, so I can't leave. I will definitely bother you next time." The sky-bearing monarch, who was deeply trusted by the Western Wasteland Great Emperor, bid his farewells and left. After Qin Yu bid his farewells, he looked at the 2 4th claw behind him, a thoughtful expression on his face. As if sensing his awkwardness, one of them opened his eyes and chuckled. "Marquis, there is no need to bother with us. We 2 old fellows only need to arrange a place for us to stay. We will take care of everything else." Qin Yu smiled and nodded. "Good. Baisu, You personally lead the 2/4 claw to a place to settle them down. Make sure everything is appropriate. Baisu nodded. He respectfully reached out a hand. 2 old sirs, please follow me. Humph. There was a cold sneer behind him. Chinyu turned and saw Little Meaty. He wasn't surprised by her elusive movements. I've stayed here long enough. When do I leave? Chinyu thought for a moment. In several days, there will be a great court meeting. After I ascend the throne, I will likely be allowed to return to the border army. In a place like the imperial capital, Little Meaty wasn't used to it. Her hands and feet were bound everywhere. In truth, Chinyu didn't like it either. Staying here, although it seemed like he had infinite glory, the truth was that he was a chess piece. His life and death weren't in his control. Little Meaty looked at him. Be careful. Don't fail to fish and end up digging yourself in. Chinyu smiled. Don't worry. A brothel was a brothel. Even if it had a nicer name, it couldn't change the nature of this business. It was as if there were some people who, even though they were in the dark, could still clearly feel the terrifying aura being emitted from them, like a blazing sun in the skies, illuminating the world. It was so dazzling that one couldn't look straight at it. General Golden Ning Chin, he said in a soft voice. His tone was calm, but there was a bit of solemnity and dignity in it. Mister, this is a transaction, and the price is very high. According to your rules, the other party has already agreed to our request. After a brief silence, the man with the terrifying aura and blazing sun in the skies nodded. Very well, I will accept this business. He turned and walked away. The darkness parted like a tide, not daring to touch him at all. After several breaths of time, the scene in front of him suddenly brightened. The one who had appeared in the corner was a handsome, middle-aged man with a calm demeanor. He wore blue clothes, and his sleeves were like a bright moon in the clear sky. Anyone who saw him would have a favorable impression of him. Cough, cough. A light cough came from behind the screen. The middle-aged man frowned, worry in his eyes. He took a few steps forward and turned around the screen. His eyes met with the skinny woman on the bed. She smiled and covered her nose and mouth with a quilt. Her face was flushed red, but her eyes were still filled with warmth and gentleness. The middle-aged man walked to the bedside and pulled down the quilt. He reached out a hand and stroked her face. If you want to cough, then cough. It's not good to hold it in. The woman shook her head. I'm fine. As soon as she finished speaking, there was a burst of violent coughing. Her skinny chest violently shook up and down, and specks of scarlet blood splashed out. A trace of panic flashed in her eyes. She covered her mouth. I'm fine, I'm really fine. Blood flowed out from between her fingers. The middle-aged man had a pained expression. The woman lying on the sickbed weeping blood was once a fairy maiden that countless people yearned for in the past. If it weren't for him, how could she have fallen to such a state? Thus, the middle-aged man had already made a great vow that he would make her whole in this life. But this matter was difficult, far too difficult. Luckily, the heavens didn't disappoint those who persevered. After suffering with her for so long, they finally saw a glimmer of hope for survival. Without caring about the bloodstains, the middle-aged man bent down and held the woman in his arms, carefully holding her like a cicada. Don't worry. I have already found a way to save you. Once I complete a task, I will be able to obtain it. As he spoke to her, the middle-aged man smiled. Once you recover, we will leave this land of trouble. We will find a place with verdant hills and clear waters, establish a cave dwelling, and live in seclusion, becoming a pair of immortal companions. The woman in his arms finally stopped coughing, but she still tightly covered her mouth, not willing to let blood flow out from her nose and mouth. Hearing this, her eyes brightened, revealing a look of longing and longing. But soon she realized something. She stared at the middle-aged man. They had been like one body for many years, and their thoughts were already connected. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment and slowly said, Ing, I don't want to hide this from you. There are some risks, but you should know my cultivation. As long as I am careful, there won't be any problems. Seeing the woman still staring at him, the middle-aged man smiled. Good. I promise you that I will come back alive to see you. The woman revealed a smile. The day before the Grand Court Conference, a master and a servant arrived outside the Zhongwu home mansion. Although there was a light veil covering them, the faint outline and slim figure were enough to show the beauty of the master and the servant. So, when the servant came forward and bowed, saying that an old friend was here to see the Marquis, the gatekeeper felt awkward. Now, everyone knows that the Marquis has brought his wife with him. Although she looks young and cute, she is actually very scheming. The servant girls in the mansion, who originally had some thoughts about the Marquis, had long extinguished those thoughts. If they sent a letter, they would be hated by his wife. But if they didn't, hiss! As the saying goes, the flowers at home are not as fragrant as the wild flowers. Who knows if they would bring even greater trouble to themselves in the future? Just as the gatekeeper's head was like a drum and he was in a dilemma, a servant girl pushed open the door and came out. She looked at the master and servant pair in front of her and said, "Madam invites the two of you in." The gatekeeper let out a long breath and hurriedly retreated to the side. He wished he could be a coward and pretend that he didn't see any of this. The master and servant pair were Yun Qing and Dai. In truth, the reason they appeared here today was because of some twists and turns. When Qin Yu left the imperial capital and went to the western border army, the two of them had been escorted by Li Zhou's people to give Qin Yu a pleasant surprise. But they never imagined that there would be some accidents on the way. By the time the delay was over, there would be news that Ning Qin was stationed in the mine. The escort team immediately stopped. No one was willing to approach that man-eating mine. As they sent messages to the imperial capital, they stayed where they were, waiting for further orders. Following that was news that General Jinwu had died underground, although the team hadn't received orders from His Highness. Since General Jinwu had died, they naturally didn't need to send beauties to a dead man. Just as they returned to the imperial capital, there was news that General Jinwu had performed a meritorious service in suppressing the mine rebellion and had been made a third-class Zhongwu Earl. This time, Li Zhou was left dumbfounded. After ruthlessly punishing the subordinate responsible for escorting them, he temporarily placed Yun Qing and Dai in a courtyard in the imperial capital. He originally thought that once the storm calmed down, he would think of a way to send them to the border army. But afterwards, a series of changes occurred. General Jinwu Ning was first impeached like a tide. Then he soared into the highest heavens and became the current Marquis Zhongwu. This was Li Zhou's first visit, because he had another mission, and because he was worried that Qin Yu would feel as if he was asking for repayment. He didn't mention this matter. He only thought that after a period of time, before Qin Yu left the imperial capital, he would have people send Yun Qing and Dai back. But who would have thought that before one wave had subsided, another would rise? The imperial capital would be shaken, and the Yi family in the rear of the army would become the target of public criticism. There were many people with discerning eyes, and they could see that Qin Yu's position was critical. Li Zhou had personally witnessed how Qin Yu had killed Yun Qing and Dai. If he kept them in his hands, they would become a hot potato. If they were used by someone with ulterior motives, he would be in trouble. Without thinking too much, Li Zhou sent people to escort Yun Qing and Dai outside the Zhongwu Marquis' mansion. As for how General Jinwu would arrange things and whether or not the rear residence would be safe, that would depend on himself. Seeing Yun Qing and Dai brought into the Marquis' mansion by a maid, the carriage driver who had been hiding in the shadows hurriedly left to report. Back residence of the Marquis' mansion. Little Meaty rubbed her chin, her eyes filled with uncertainty. To her, this was a rare situation. She took several steps back and forth, a fidgety look on her face. She wanted to turn around and leave, but she also wanted to see Qin Yu one last time. As Little Meaty was hesitating, a maid reported from outside the exquisite reception hall. "Madam, the guests have arrived." Little Meaty took a deep breath. "Go. Arrange them in the side courtyard and have people serve them well." She clenched her teeth. "Send someone to the front courtyard and have the Marquis make his own arrangements." Along the way, the maid who had been sneering to herself was suddenly left dumbfounded. She bowed in a daze and then turned to leave. As she looked at the master and servant from the corner of her eyes, she couldn't help but feel a bit more awe. In the reception hall, Little Meaty covered her face with her hands. After lowering them, she clenched her teeth and finally sighed. Whatever. Since they didn't want to see them, then so be it. Chapter 1569. When Chinyu learned of this news, he was playing with the third-class Marquis Loyal Marshal seal that the military had sent over. The Marquis seal was black and gold. The two colors wove together. Although it seemed chaotic, the truth was that it exuded a majestic aura. Old friends? Two women? Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows. He put away the seal and walked towards the rear courtyard. Along the way, after asking a few questions, he was able to roughly guess who the two people the maid was talking about were. He entered the rear courtyard and stepped into the courtyard. As everyone bowed, the figures of Yunqing and Xiao Dai appeared in front of him. It really was them. Strictly speaking, it hadn't been too long since they parted, but the disparity in status between now and the past was even more astonishing. Seeing Chinyu stride towards them in his marquis robes, Yunqing and Xiao Dai cautiously bowed from afar. "Greetings, Lord Marquis." Sixth Highness Li Yizhou and that madam he hadn't seen just now might have thought that they were old friends of General Jinwu. But in truth, the two of them knew that in General Jinwu's heart, they didn't have too important a status. At most, they would be used, but Li Yizhou had ordered people to bring them to the loyal Marshal Marquis mansion. With the carriage driver watching from afar, they could only brace themselves and call out. Chinyu's eyes flashed. "Rise." His eyes swept over the two. Then he looked at the maid with a respectful expression. Did the madam invite them in and arrange for them to stay here? Yes, the maid said in a soft voice. Subconsciously, her eyes began to shine, but as she thought of something, her body stiffened and she lowered her head. Chinyu nodded. His eyes fell onto the face that was exactly the same as in his memories. A dazed feeling rose in his heart, but it quickly vanished. He lightly said, "Since you've come, you may stay in the mansion. I have other matters to attend to, so I will be leaving first." Yun Dai let out a breath of relief, but at the same time, she also felt a bit disappointed. After leaving the master and maid's dwelling, Chinyu took a deep breath. Without stopping, he rushed straight towards the main courtyard. As the madam, that everyone knew Little Meaty lived here. News of a pair of beautiful maidens being led into the mansion by the madam had already spread out. Seeing the Lord Marquis's hasty and dignified expression, the maids and attendants quickly bowed. Chinyu looked at Little Meaty. He waved his hand and said, "Leave. Without my order, no one is allowed to enter." Yes, everyone bowed and left in a hurry. Chinyu took 2 steps forwards. He stared at those fleshy eyes and said in a low voice, "I want to ask you something. I ask you to answer me truthfully." He paused for a moment. "There are 2 people outside the door. Why did you let them in?" Meaty blinked her eyes. "They said that they were your old friends. I saw that they were somewhat entangled with you, so I agreed. After all, you are now a thorn in the side of others. Who knows what methods they will use to kill you? Call them over. I've seen that they're fine, so I can rest assured." It sounded plausible, but Chinyu didn't believe it at all. "Stop making things up. Let's be frank here. You don't have the personality to meddle in other people's business. So why did you let them in?" Little Meaty rolled her eyes. "Believe it or not, it's up to you." He stood up and prepared to leave. Chinyu didn't stop her. He only said, "Since you don't want to talk, I'll have Yunqing come over and confront you face to face." "You dare!" Little Meaty panicked. Her face was full of anger. "Qinyu, don't be so ungrateful. I let those 2 women in for your own good." Qinyu nodded. "Then I thank you." He turned and walked away. Thud, thud, thud. After several steps, Little Meaty grabbed onto his arm, her eyes ruthlessly glaring at him. If it were anything else, she would have just joked about it, and Qinyu would have just muddled along and not pursued the matter any further. But not this time. Qinyu lowered his head and met Little Meaty's gaze. His eyes were calm and filled with a firm will. It was clear that he wouldn't give up until he achieved his goal. Little Meaty humphed. She was the first to look away and let go. Qinyu didn't continue walking away. He knew that Little Meaty had already admitted defeat. "You have no conscience, you ingrate!" Little Meaty angrily cursed. She clenched her teeth. "That's right, that little woman called Yunqing does have some problems. But don't ask me about the specifics, because I won't tell you." A sharp light burst out from deep within Qinyu's eyes. He took a deep breath and pressed forwards. Little Meaty was she. "Stop!" Little Meaty screamed, her face full of anger. "I told you not to ask. If you continue like this, I will leave." Qinyu furrowed his eyebrows. His intuition told him that Little Meaty wasn't lying. When Yunqing was mentioned, she indeed felt uncomfortable. There was even a bit of restlessness, like natural enemies repelling each other. That's right, there was a bit of a similar feeling. Little Meaty dreaded this. She didn't want to meet Yunqing at all. At this moment, Qinyu's heart was filled with excitement. He revealed an incomparably brilliant smile. He originally thought that she had truly vanished from this world, not leaving a single trace behind. But reality proved that this wasn't the case. Liao Shi had indeed vanished, but she had still left behind a trace in this world. Although Yunqing hadn't recognized him and her cultivation was so weak that it was almost negligible, she was still her. Otherwise, how could she have caused a solemn and mysterious existence hidden in space-time to feel such dread? Little Meaty's complexion was ugly. She felt as if she had picked up a stone and smashed it on her own foot. She regretted interfering and allowing that master and servant pair to enter. But if she could do it all over again, there was a high chance she would do the same thing, even if she already knew what the result would be. This discovery caused Little Meaty's mood to worsen. She clenched her teeth and roared, "I didn't say anything, but if you dare to bring her here, I will leave immediately." Qinyu smiled. "Don't worry, I guarantee that Yunqing won't appear in front of you." As for why, he didn't have the mood to think about it. He wanted to see Yunqing. He wanted to see the woman who had silently done everything for him in the past and who had ultimately disappeared. Qinyu turned and left, impatient to do so. Thus, Little Meaty's complexion became even uglier than before. Her complexion darkened like thick cumulus clouds, dripping with moisture. Marquis Zhongwu left and returned. In the courtyard, it wasn't just the master and servant pair that were confused, but the maids and attendants also had strange expressions. Qinyu took a deep breath and walked in front of Yunqing. As he looked at the nervous expression on her face, he suddenly discovered that even though he had countless words in his heart, there was nothing he could say. This was because even though the current Yunqing was the Liao Shi of the past, she didn't know him. Qinyu let out a deep breath and tried to make his expression as gentle as possible. "Yunqing, in the imperial capital, did anyone bully you?" Yunqing's eyes widened. She looked at the Qinyu in front of her with shock. She clearly didn't understand why his attitude had changed so drastically after returning for such a short period of time. From the previous calm and indifference to the current caring. That's right. This was the feeling that Qinyu gave Yunqing. It was as if as long as she opened her mouth and casually mentioned a person's name, no matter who that person was, they would immediately suffer great misfortune. But with her cautious and careful personality, Yun Qing didn't dare to believe her own feelings. Instead, she became increasingly restless. She paled and shook her head. No. Qin Yu took a step back, a smile on his face. Did I scare you? Yes, that should be the case. Don't be afraid and don't be angry. I made a mistake before and didn't recognize you. In truth, perhaps it isn't appropriate to tell you this right now. In short, I owe you a great, great favor from a long, long time ago. You might not be able to understand these words, so you don't need to understand them for now. In short, you just need to remember that I will protect you and help you. I won't allow anyone to harm you, not even the tiniest bit. He was smiling, and his smile became increasingly brilliant. But his tone was incomparably sincere, and every word came from his heart. Teacher Liao, I once thought that I would never be able to see you again in this life. Now that I have finally found you, I will definitely repay you tenfold, 100-fold. Yun Qing looked at the Qin Yu in front of her that had suddenly become a stranger. Deep in her heart, she felt a sense of closeness and trust towards him. She still felt that this was absurd. She couldn't understand why this Marquis Zhongwu, a great figure of the Western Wasteland Empire, would suddenly have such a drastic change in attitude. But this didn't affect Yun Qing's feeling of sincerity and also the excitement in her heart. Her heart began to race. She thought for a moment and lowered her head. Little Butterfly glanced at Marquis Zhongwu, who was staring at her miss. She clenched her teeth and suddenly fell to her knees. Marquis, if you really want to protect my miss, then please help her. On the road to the border army camp, she nearly died. Little Butterfly, Yun Qing shouted. She suddenly panicked. You, Marquis, there is no need to listen to her nonsense. What happened in the past is already in the past. I'm perfectly fine. Qin Yu frowned for a moment before relaxing. He nodded. It's good that you're fine. He knew that haste made waste. His eyes swept over the maids and attendants around him. Miss Yun Qing, serve her well. If anything happens to her, I will not forgive you. His tone was cold and callous. When he looked at Yun Qing, it was like a warm sun. He cupped his hands together and bid his farewells. After leaving the small courtyard, Qin Yu's complexion darkened. Cold waves surged in his eyes. Yun Qing had nearly died. At that time, he didn't know that she was Teacher Liao. Although she was fine now, just thinking about how he would never be able to see her again left him flustered and filled with endless anger. Someone come. Wang Datu quietly appeared behind him. General, please give me your orders. Qin Yu lightly said. Go to Li's palace and tell him that I know why Yun Qing nearly died without missing a single word. Tell him exactly what you said. Wang Datu respectfully bowed. Yes. He turned and walked away, his heart filled with emotion. My general is truly amazing now. He can even speak to a highness of the Western wilderness with such an attitude and tone. He is honored, absolutely honored. Then he discovered that he was completely ignorant of the imperial capital. He simply didn't know where the 6th Highness Palace was. Cough! Wang Data coughed and waved his hand. Shwa! Shwa! Several strong figures of the border army appeared in the surroundings. Although they had followed the general's orders and were resting in the side courtyard, it was impossible for them to just lie down and wait for death. Without a trace, they had already taken over the guard and patrol duties of the mansion. Wang Data nodded with satisfaction. He thought that they were truly worthy of being under his command. They were truly excellent. When he saw his nephew Wang San, his mood became even better. He pointed a finger. Wang San, that's right, I'm calling you. Immediately go to 6th Highness Li's palace and pass on a message for the general. He straightened his back and subconsciously crossed his hands behind his back, repeating Qin Yu's words. Wang San shrunk his neck back, a nervous expression on his face. Uncle, cough, this isn't a military camp. Who doesn't know of our relationship? I'm just calling you. Uncle, I am the only child of my generation in our Wang family. In the future, I will have to take care of you until you die, so please don't harm me." He had a sad face. He really was about to cry. He was kicked by Big Head Wang, who scolded him for being a good-for-nothing. "Our general is one of the best in the capital right now." He gave him a thumbs up and shouted, "If I tell you to go, then go. What's with all the nonsense? Hurry up. If you mess up the general's matters, I will skin you alive." His nephew was naturally going to be the scapegoat. Humming a little song, Wang Dada left in a good mood. The border soldiers who weren't assigned anything felt sympathy for Wang San and vanished once more. Yun Qing had the others leave. She frowned as she looked at Xiao Dai. She wanted to say several harsh words, but as she thought about how master and servant depended on each other, she couldn't bring herself to say them. Xiao Dai fell to her knees. "Miss, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have spoken so carelessly." Yun Qing bitterly smiled. "In truth, you already know. Since that's the case, why did you speak so much? Look at our current situation. It's already difficult for us to survive, so how could we dare to provoke trouble on our own initiative?" As she spoke, the bitter smile on her face deepened. Moreover, those people didn't even place Li Yizhou in their eyes back then. Although Marquis Zhongwu is an influential figure in the imperial capital, if we were to provoke a powerful enemy because of us, I'm afraid he would turn around and vent his anger on us. At that time, how will we, master and servant, bear the consequences? Xiao Dai clenched her teeth. Just now, when I looked at Marquis Zhongwu's attitude, it didn't seem fake. Yun Qing looked at her, not speaking. Xiao Dai knelt on the ground. "Miss, I admit that I wanted to use this matter to determine his true attitude. If Marquis Zhongwu really treats you as he says, then if you suffer such grievances, he will definitely stand up for you. On the other hand, if he takes his anger out on us, then that means he was lying. I believe it's better to know sooner rather than later." Yun Qing sighed. Xiao Dai had grown up together with her. Although they were master and servant in name, she had always viewed her as her little sister. They had lived together for so many years, so how could she not guess her true thoughts? Although her words weren't wrong, they were still too rash. Did she really think that after experiencing so many things, she was still the same girl that had a glimmer of hope in her heart in Guanhai City? But now that things had come to this, there was no point in saying anything more. Yun Qing reached out and pulled her up. "Now we can only resign ourselves to fate." Looking at the Mrs. face, Xiao Dai suddenly felt some regret. She was indeed a bit willful and rash. But who told what Marquis Zhongwu said to be true? Even she couldn't help but believe him a bit. A peasant soldier from the border army arrived outside the temporary palace and asked to see Li Yi. The guards outside the temporary palace were stunned for 2 seconds before they reacted. This bastard actually said His Highness's name. If it wasn't for Wang San's quick reaction and taking the initiative to reveal his identity, saying that he was from the Marquis Zhongwu's residence, it would probably be a bloody case in the blink of an eye. But even so, he was still shrouded by the cold gazes from the other side. He waited for the reply from inside the temporary palace. If His Highness did not respond or sneered, they could guarantee that this peasant soldier in front of them would immediately be chopped into pieces. Unfortunately, the ferocity in their eyes could not be displayed in the end. "His Highness invites you in." Sage Zhou Yan looked at the border soldier in front of him. His cultivation level was average, and his appearance was average. Although he was so scared that his face was slightly pale, he still gave people a feeling that he was in a daze. He thought to himself, what could happen if Marquis Zhongwu sent such a hothead? Walking in the magnificent and fairyland-like temporary palace of the prince, Wang San swallowed his saliva and then came back to his senses. Just now, he had actually called out the name of a prince in front of everyone. At first, he was afraid and broke out in a cold sweat. Then he came to his senses. Not only was he fine, he was even invited to the temporary palace. My general is simply too awesome. I, Wang San, am honored. Ahem! From this angle, the uncle and nephew of the Wang family were indeed two branches of the same bloodline. Birds of a feather flocked together. Chapter 1570. Huang Zhou's surname was Zhou, but he was called Li Yizhou's Sixth Highness. As he looked down at the stunned border army soldier Wang San, he frowned and revealed a bitter smile. Marquis Zhongwu's words were filled with dissatisfaction and dissatisfaction. He really couldn't understand why a pair of brothel girls who met by chance, even if they had a moment of happiness, would care so much. Could it be that Jinwu General Ningqin was truly an infatuated seed? But if this was true, then how would that madam in the manner be explained? He couldn't figure it out, but he still had a headache. The reason was because Marquis Zhongwu wanted to be on good terms with him. This was likely related to the future inheritance of the throne. But the Li family were even more difficult to provoke. Although he was Huang Zhou Highness, he was still restrained in front of them. Wang San didn't know that the Sixth Highness in front of him was currently in a state of melancholy. Thinking about his Marquis's domineering aura, he unconsciously felt more confident. He cupped his hands together and said, "Your Highness, the Marquis is waiting for my reply. Please hurry up." Li Yizhou was so angry that he almost laughed. He thought to himself, "I don't want to offend the Marquis of Zhongwu, but you're just a peasant from the border army. Even if I killed you on the spot, would there still be people who would jump out and cry injustice?" But killing intent only flashed for a moment before it was suppressed. He was just a little border army soldier. What meaning was there in killing him? It would only cause trouble. Taking a deep breath, Li Yizhou said, "I don't know the details of this matter. You can wait outside the hall. After I ask, I will give you an answer." Wang San was a bit dissatisfied, but his courage wasn't greater than the heavens. He cupped his hands together and said, "I will wait outside the hall." His words were still hurrying him. Saint Zhou Yen rubbed his temples. He looked at his highness, thinking that it wasn't easy for this border army soldier called Wang San to still be alive. Li Yizhou stood up and left. This involved Marquis Zhongwu and the Li family, so he didn't dare to make a decision alone. Asking was just an excuse. As for the specifics, he had to ask for instructions first. As for Wang San, he was just an idiot. He wasn't in the mood to waste time with him. He turned and entered the hall. Li Yizhou cupped his hands together and said, "Son Li Yizhou asks your majesty to descend." This time the wait was slightly longer. The air fluctuated, and the blurry figure of the great emperor, who was rarely behind the bead curtain, appeared. "What is it?" His tone was indifferent and lofty. Li Yizhou was extremely respectful as he recounted everything that had happened just now. He didn't conceal anything in the slightest, nor did he mix in the slightest bit of his own attitude. "This matter is of great importance. I dare not act on my own. Thus, I took the liberty to disturb your majesty. I hope your majesty will forgive me." In the trembling space, the great emperor's shadow was silent for a moment. Then he slowly said, "You have considered this matter thoroughly." He paused for a moment. "From now on, you don't need to interfere. I will deal with it myself." The phantom disappeared, and the space returned to calmness. Li Yizhou stood up and pursed his lips, revealing a bitter smile. Just one sentence of thorough consideration, and that was it. If it were the other brothers and sisters who were favored by His Majesty, they would probably receive some rewards. After all, this matter could be said to be extremely small. But if one were to consider it as a big matter, and if it were to be grasped by someone with ulterior motives, it might set off a great storm. "Your Majesty, they are all your own flesh and blood. Why are you so biased?" Li Yizhou took a deep breath and restrained his emotions. By the time he returned to the front hall, his expression had already calmed down. He called Wang San over and said indifferently, "I have already told Marquis Zhongwu about this matter. You can go back." Wang San rubbed his head, a little suspecting that he had been fooled. "Get out of my way." Li Yizhou's face was filled with anger. The hot-headed young man finally reacted. No matter how powerful the Marquis was, he was not the one who was powerful. Zhongwu Marquis Mansion. In a side courtyard, two old fourth claws were sitting cross-legged. Their heads were drooped down, not the least bit of essence, energy, and soul leaking from their bodies. They were like two pieces of dry wood that had been buried up to their necks. But at this time, the two old fourth claws opened their eyes, a sharp light flashing in them. Glancing at each other, the two old fourth claws simultaneously raised their hands and punched out. Dong! With a deep and dull sound, layers upon layers of fluctuations instantly spread out, covering the entire Zhongwu Marquis Mansion. In the back hall, little Ro frowned, a cold intent in her eyes. If this were before or in another place, if these two old sugar canes dared to bare their fangs in front of her, they would have already been captured and eaten. She lifted a hand, and waves appeared in the air, wrapping around her like a bubble. As for the other courtyard, there was no need to pay attention to the master and servant that she didn't want to see. After all, she was currently an ordinary person, let alone the two old fourth claws. Even the Western Wasteland Great Emperor couldn't see through her depths. Qin Yu frowned. He naturally sensed the actions of the two old fourth claws. Then the space in front of him began to shake. Feeling the aura transmitted out, Qin Yu stood up and bowed. Subject Ning Qin greets, Your Majesty. Behind the bead curtain, the Western Wasteland Great Emperor's figure appeared. He waved his hand and said, No need for formalities. Thank you, Your Majesty. Qin Yu stood up, his eyebrows furrowed together, a dignified expression on his face. It's just a private matter. I didn't think I would disturb Your Majesty. It seems this matter is quite thorny. There was naturally a reason for the Western Wasteland Great Emperor's sudden arrival. Qin Yu thought for a moment and grasped the crux of the matter. Marquis Zhongwu, I can tell you that the one you are looking for is the Li family. After a brief pause, the Great Emperor's voice continued to ring out, a faint, self-deprecating light in his calm voice. In my imperial Zhou, the bloodline of the Emperor clans actually uses the Li character in front of their surname. Although this is a teaching set down by our ancestors, I am still very dissatisfied with this. Although he didn't explicitly say it, these simple words revealed far too much inside information. Qin Yu frowned. Then he slowly relaxed. He cupped his hands together and bowed. Your Majesty, is the so-called Li family really untouchable? The Great Emperor said, They have a deep background and vast fortunes. Before the time is right, do not act rashly, otherwise you will only be harmed. He looked at Qin Yu, his eyes deep. I can make you a promise. If everything goes smoothly, I will naturally give you an explanation for this matter in the future. Qin Yu bowed. Thank you, Your Majesty. I cannot stay any longer. I will be leaving. Space returned to tranquility, and the Great Emperor's projection vanished. Qin Yu straightened himself, his eyebrows furrowed together, a gloomy look in his eyes. Imperial Zhou's Li family, before the nation's surname, to be able to cause the Western Wasteland Great Emperor to feel dread, to the point where he could only patiently endure his dissatisfaction. It truly wasn't someone to be trifled with. He shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. He had left behind harsh words in front of Yunqing, and now he had lost face for his own family. This inevitably caused Qin Yu to feel a bit awkward. But soon he took a deep breath and suppressed all these emotions deep in his heart. Thinking for a moment, he pushed open the door and arrived at the courtyard where Yunqing and her servant lived. Greetings, Lord Marquis. The maids and attendants hurriedly bowed. Yunqing, Xiaodai, and her servant followed behind. Qin Yu waved his hand. Leave. Everyone bowed and excused themselves. In the bright and exquisite living room, there was only the master and servant left. As they looked at the Marquis Zhongwu in front of them, they couldn't help but feel nervous. After thinking for a moment, Qin Yu bitterly smiled. Yunqing, I cannot touch the person who nearly killed you right now, but I guarantee you that I will remember this matter in my heart, and sooner or later I will give you an explanation." Yunqing bowed. She earnestly said, "Lord Marquis, there is no need to be like this. I have already said that since he is fine, there is no need to pursue the past." Xiao Dai lowered her head, not speaking. A trace of disappointment flashed in her eyes, followed by a bit of ridicule. She thought to herself that the men of this world were truly skilled with their mouths. Their words were so beautiful that one couldn't help but want to believe them. But when it came to fighting, they all turned into soft shrimps. Qin Yu glanced at her, the bitter smile on his face deepening. "The person who moved against you was the Li family of the Western Desolate." Thinking for a moment, he said, "The Western Desolate's emperor family is surnamed Zhou, but the direct bloodline of the emperor family is surnamed Li. For instance, that Li Yizhou you met before." Yunqing's complexion changed. Xiao Dai also couldn't help but look up, shock on her face. The Emperor Zhou family, the crown of the emperor family in the Western Desolate, this was a taboo topic to begin with. In the early years, many people had lost their heads because of this. Although this taboo topic had relaxed a great deal with the passing of time, there were still very few people who dared to talk about it in private. Of course, as long as one knew of this matter, their doubts and puzzlement would never lessen. Although Qin Yu didn't say much, the meaning he conveyed left the master and servant startled. Qin Yu bitterly smiled as he met their eyes. "I won't go so far as to lie to you too about this matter." Yunqing bowed, her complexion pale. "I believe what Lord Marquis says. So, I ask that you do not ask about this matter again." She thought back to when those people who called themselves the Li family faced the subordinates of Sixth Highness Li Yizhou without any scruples at all. If this was true, then this was the Li family from before the nation's surname, disregarding how much karma and inside information was hidden. Their strength must have been extremely formidable. Otherwise, how could they have sat peacefully in front of the nation's surname until today? Qin Yu nodded. "Don't be afraid. I can guarantee that I won't provoke the Li family on my own initiative for now. But I will do what I promised you." He smiled, his expression calm. "From now on, I will protect you so that no harm comes to you. In the abyss in the past, you have done countless things for me. Now it is my turn to repay you," seeing that if he stayed, the master and servant would feel even more uneasy. Qin Yu stood up and left. Xiao Dai timidly looked up. "Miss, this Marquis loyal marshal." Halfway through her words, she didn't know what to say. Yunqing bitterly smiled. "I don't know what to do either." She was also at a loss. She always felt that he was amiable and trustworthy, but she didn't know why his attitude had suddenly changed. Just what was going on? The two old fourth claws glanced at each other, puzzlement in their eyes. They couldn't figure out why the dignified Marquis Loyal Marshal, someone who was destined to have a limitless future, would treat this master and servant so differently. Now that everything in this mansion was under their eyes, they could clearly see that Yunqing and Xiao Dai were only ordinary people. In terms of beauty, they could indeed be called extraordinary. But as old watchdogs of the imperial palace that had lived for countless years, they had seen countless beauties. These two couldn't be considered peak beauties. Could it be that they really were infatuated with each other? If this was true, then this could be considered a good thing for His Majesty. After hesitating for a moment, one of the old fourth claws took out a blue jade talisman. He lifted a hand and touched it. After several breaths of time, he flicked his finger. With a loud hum, the jade talisman trembled and ripples spread out before it instantly vanished from sight. As the son of heaven's trusted aides, they were naturally the son of heaven's eyes and ears. It was true that they guarded the loyal Marshal Marquis Mansion and obeyed his orders, but deep down they were still His Majesty's lackeys.